Welcome, everyone, to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. My name's Sherrod Mello, and I'm the Shepherd of Black Sheep. First, let me do a few announcements here. Number one, when I was talking about Conan O'Brien's party and what Rob Reiner had said about how he was terrified, petrified, to use his words, of his son, and he thought, wow, my son could actually hurt me, I did not say that he was saying that to Conan. This is said to someone that we don't know who he said this to. But it was also reported that the other people at the party had said it seemed like Nick Reiner needed to be in a mental hospital. And especially considering what happened, that seems like it would have been a good choice. So for Conan to call the police, given what the other people were saying at the time, would have been completely understandable, if you ask me. Also to note, I am only speculating when I say that Alan Jackson, Nick Reiner's lawyer, is feeding information to TMZ. That's not confirmed in any way. That is my speculation that that's what's going on. And then the other thing is, we don't know for sure when he was diagnosed with schizophrenia either. That's also just speculation. But Phil Bradley, welcome. Crazy, welcome. Danielle, welcome. Living the mac and cheese. I love it. Nope. You guys are less than 90 seconds in. You're killing it. And Phil Bradley, neither late nor early, as always. A shocker, what would you say? Now, my experience is this. I have someone who's been through narcissistic abuse. I've been undiagnosed on the spectrum. I've had severe anxiety and depression, and I've recovered from addiction. I've been on opiates, etc. So I understand those things from that angle. But I am not a licensed professional in those things. But I do have a lot of life experience that a lot of licensed professionals do not. So if that's the kind of thing you find valuable, that's why you would like what I have to say. Another thing to note, the chats are getting big enough here so that I will probably need a couple moderators soon. So if there's any volunteers for moderators, I would definitely keep you in mind there. So anyone who wants to do that, and we'll figure that out after this live is over. But in this video, I'm going to break down 4 videos. One is from Mark, what's his name here? Andrew Vandervaart. That's going to be the first one. Then there's going to be an HG Tudor video, a Dr. Grande video, and then a Hidden Killers video with Tony Breuski. So these should all be pretty interesting. And with these 4, we're going to get everything up to date. We're going to know everything's going on right now, and I think it's going to be pretty cool. Danielle, how are you? That's why I'm sharing it, Duncan. And the other part about it is this. I'm also sharing it so that the future parents and the people that are going to be parents and they have a son or daughter that's in a situation like this, they'll better know how, they'll be better able to understand how to deal with this kind of situation. Right? That's why we're talking about it. It's not about just to gossip about what happened. It's about what can we learn from the situation. And everything that happens, there is something to learn and an opportunity. So we're taking what we can learn from this. And the opportunity is also okay, what can we do differently in the future, understanding what happened in this circumstance? Something to keep in mind. Black Reggie says, total tragedy, especially with his parents' money, paying for his defense. Only in America. And we still don't know, and that's another thing. We don't know who's paying for his defense. There's speculation that it's the family's estate, but I also saw a rule that in California that's not allowed per se. Don't quote me on that, but that's also what I heard. My son had a psychotic break, could have killed someone. Unfortunately, yes, that's absolutely what can happen. But let's jump into this here. Ellie, welcome to the chat. So Duncan, your father probably has some interesting stories too. All right, here we go. Here's the first gentleman. Let's see. His name is Andrew Vandervaart. He is an MD, PhD.
In 2016, Nick Reiner and Rob Reiner went on a press tour for a movie they ostensibly made together. As you've probably seen, one line from one of these interviews seems disturbingly prescient.
You don't seem very fiery to me. You seem like you
crazy. I get crazy. Yeah.
Okay.
You don't want to set me off.
But there's also a general air of tension in those interviews that, at least in hindsight, seems foreboding.
He could go deeper with it. I mean, it was funny, but I felt the subject matter, should allow him to go deeper with it.
Yeah, well, that wasn't said at the time. It was sort of just like, hey, this is trash. But anyway.
And look at how awkward Rob Reiner looks here in this circumstance, because his son is basically disputing what he just said in front of everyone, which kind of makes him look ridiculous. And Rob Reiner knows that.
we went along, and
you're like, wow, my dad's Rob Reiner.
I never had thought about it, and then
it didn't cross your mind, right?
Never.
And Nick was there for all the casting, all of the auditions.
I was sitting there, but
but you always gave your opinion.
But anger or resentment of an adult son for his famous father is one thing, and homicidal rage is another, right? I'm Andrew Vaart, a psychiatrist and neuroscientist. Given that I have never personally examined Nick Reiner and he is not my patient, I cannot give professional diagnostic opinions. However, we can discuss some of the publicly available information and speculate on the potential forces at play in cases like this.
And again, and that's a good disclaimer. We are not diagnosing him with anything. We will report if there's any official diagnosis that comes out, but everything we're going to share in this video is only speculation. It is not any kind of official diagnosis. No one can diagnose somebody for real unless they've actually spent time with them. And this goes true for public figures as well. You got to be careful throwing the labels around as if you know what you're talking about, when sometimes people don't. And even if you're a licensed professional, you have to be careful what you say. And that's why this guy has the disclaimer he did.
Any opinions expressed are my own. So let's briefly review the timeline of the murders. On Saturday, December 13th, Nick Reiner was brought along to Conan O'Brien's Christmas party by his parents, who were reportedly worried about leaving him home alone given his recent erratic behaviors. At that party, there have been multiple sources describing Nick's behavior, although none have been willing to go on the record. But allegedly, he was walking up to attendees, interrupting their conversations, and kept asking people, "Are you famous?" This does sound like an odd question, and one that I don't really imagine someone would just invent when talking to TMZ or People magazine.
And again, and this is what happened at the party. This is what he's asking people. Oh, are you famous? And he's creeping people out. And then Rob Reiner goes up to him and confronts him about it. And apparently it turned into a shouting match a little bit. But that wasn't meant to humiliate Nick. Rob was just trying to confront him because what are you doing? Like, what are you doing at this party here, right?
Because it's both so odd, but also so specific. To say he was going up to everyone, asking them if they're famous, it's a strange thing, right? And to me, it sounds like a sort of inside joke, but one where Nick Reiner is the only one in on the joke. Another reported encounter, again, an anonymous source, is that Nick Reiner interrupted a conversation the comic actor Bill Hader was having, but was then told the conversation was private, and that Nick then stared, standing very still for an uncomfortable period of time before storming off. So standing very still and staring, if nothing else, I think is a sign of very poor social reciprocity. He was not aware, similarly to asking people a non sequitur about whether they were famous. It is a sign of someone that does not know or does not care how they are coming off. Again, a bit like the world to Nick Reiner at that time was only occupied by one main character and everyone else was supporting cast.
And again, you'd want to see what the tone was when he's doing this. Is he trying to troll? Is he trying just to be like a bit of a dick? Or is he kind of more in a mental breakdown? Or is he tweaking? Because depending on which one it was, that would determine more of how I see it. Like, you got to see the energy. Like, what was the tone like? So far, considering what we know about him already, I wouldn't be surprised if he's kind of like trolling people a little bit. But it's hard to say.
Next, there was apparently a verbal altercation between Nick Reiner and Rob Reiner. Again, anonymous reports, but of a shouting match triggered by Rob Reiner's embarrassment at his son's behavior, described in the New York Post and elsewhere as a massive blow-up with yelling between the two, such that at one point partygoers were discussing calling the police for a mental health hold, essentially an emergency evaluation at a hospital. The fight account has been disputed, however, with an executive, quote unquote, at the Conan party saying he saw no fight. It's BS.
And again, this is where the facts are important. Which one's true? Were people saying that there should be a mental health hold? Was there an argument between Nick and Rob? Very important things to know. If there was an argument, and if people were truly saying, yeah, Nick should be on a mental health hold, then it would make more sense to call the police. And no one said again that Rob Reiner said to Conan, yes, I'm petrified of my son. I think he could hurt me. No, I don't think that is what happened. But if there's an argument and people were speculating there should be a mental health hold, maybe it wouldn't have been the worst thing to call the police. But I've heard other people saying, well, that might have made the situation worse. And it's like, how much worse could it possibly go than what it already did, is what I would say.
I'm not sure one report of not seeing a fight means that there wasn't a fight, because it's sort of harder to be sure of the absence of something than the presence of something. But this executive says he never saw it. So it's unknown when Nick Reiner left the party, but the Reiners were seen on video leaving the event at 11:47 p.m. on Sunday. Around 4 a.m., Nick Reiner checked into the Pierside Santa Monica Hotel a few miles from the Reiner house. A staffer of the hotel reported that Nick looked, quote, tweaked out, which is Californian for very nervous, maybe disheveled, maybe overstimulated, I believe.
Now, tweaked out means you're high. Tweaked out usually means you're high on meth, crack, or maybe a lot of Adderall or Coke. That's what that means.
Nick left the hotel Sunday morning without formally checking out. And then when staff went to clean his room, they found the shower, quote, full of blood, as well as bloodstains on the bed and the windows of the room having been covered with bed sheets. That same day, Rob Reiner
and what does that say? The fact that he covered the windows with bed sheets. That means there's some awareness here of what he actually did. That's what that says to me.
His wife, Michelle, were found dead in their bedroom from multiple stab wounds. Since then, Nick Reiner has been arrested and charged with homicide. Legally, he is innocent until proven guilty, but at least at this time, there seems to be more so a discussion about his mental health and a potential insanity defense. Now, again, that question is not my role here. I just want to provide what I might think about if I were making a formulation. And look, I don't have nearly enough data, so this could all be fog of war. But I do think there are things pertinent to all of us, questions generally about substance use, personality, and pathology. So if you're going to make a formulation, you have to think that nothing ever has just one cause, and least of all the human mind, which is not an event that might be caused by some preceding circumstance, but is a process that is constantly in flux. So there are many ways to break down a formulation, the most common being the biopsychosocial model, which says look at the biological layer, look at the psychological layer and the social layer, and pay attention to all of the crosstalk between these layers, how one influences the other, and what the feedback loops are between these levels. Another is the Perspectives of Psychiatry model by McHugh and Slavny, which examines individuals through 4 perspectives, put simply as what the person has, so illness, disease, brain pathology, who the person is, so personality, traits, what the person is doing, behaviors, maladaptive coping, substance.
Well, time out. So Thirsty Eye says he's aware, but covering windows is more crazy than aware. Sometimes. But here's the other thing. If you've ever been around people that are on stimulant drugs, whether it's crack or meth or whatever, they get super paranoid. And a lot of times they'll want to cover the windows, or they think the feds will be watching them out in the bushes. So that might have been a little bit of what was going on there too, perhaps.
And what story the person is telling. So what they have encountered, what has been their life story, how do they make meaning in life? So maybe here we can consider the unique interactions that might occur between all of these levels, with the caveat that it's a complicated web. So on the biological layer, and with the perspective of something the person has, it has been reported by TMZ and others now that Nick Reiner had a diagnosis of schizophrenia. What had also been previously well known to the public, including via the movie Being Charlie, which was based on Nick Reiner's life and made by his father, Rob, was that Nick Reiner had a severe substance use history, including cannabis, cocaine, heroin, and meth, really just a poly substance use from the age of 14 onwards. Now, if you look at the DSM-5, you'll see schizophrenia, which means essentially chronic psychosis, and you'll see substance-induced psychosis, which is psychosis triggered by intoxication or withdrawal. But there are two issues here. The first is, what do you do when essentially someone has chronic substance-induced psychosis, meaning there is constant substance use and the substance is constantly causing psychosis? By the way, what is psychosis? Well, it's a break from reality, and typically it looks like a combination of hypersalience, so things seeming extremely significant, with an example being paranoia, where innocuous things might seem extremely significant and threatening, so that everything becomes fearful and meaningful in a scary way.
And again, to note here, there's schizophrenia, then there's schizophrenia that gets worse by drug abuse, especially stimulants like crack, meth, etc. And then there's something that can mimic schizophrenia, where someone drugs them into that induced state. And it's debatable, you could say, whether would that also qualify for schizophrenia if you drug yourself into it and then it doesn't go away? They don't really know about that. But in the Being Charlie movie, there was no mention of schizophrenia in that movie, as far as I know. No one mentioned that diagnosis then. And as far as we also know, the source is the person telling TMZ that he's been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And my speculation, this is not a fact, but my speculation is it's the lawyer, Alan Jackson, who's feeding TMZ the information. Why do I think that? Because there was a very similar pattern in the Karen Reed case, in which Alan Jackson was also the lawyer. But remember, that's only a speculation by me. That's not a fact.
And then disorganization or fragmentation. So concepts or even words not connecting in a way that makes sense. And I think at least part of that breakdown and continuity of thought may be from a working memory impairment. There's certainly working memory impairment in schizophrenia. And there's also working memory impairment in, say, very high doses of THC. So I don't know if you've ever been extremely high, like too high, but I hear that people start saying something and then forget what they had started saying by the end of the sentence, right? That sort of, what were we talking about?
I was on set with him. Yeah.
No, sorry, go ahead.
I have no idea what I was going to say.
So if you imagine being in that sort of state where you're trying to plow through, not remembering what you were just talking about and still talking, you can see how there might be kind of a discontinuity of thoughts, a breakdown, a disorganization of thoughts. So again, for some people, if THC is causing a psychosis like paranoia and working memory impairment, but they're also doing it constantly, doing THC constantly, is that chronic psychosis? Functionally, yeah, but is it schizophrenia? Well, technically the DSM-5 would say it's not schizophrenia if it's being caused by something else, if it's being caused by a substance.
And that is what I would lean towards as well. If it's caused by a substance, it's not true schizophrenia. It's schizophrenia like symptoms in that case. But to me, that's probably a little bit different.
But what do you actually do in the case of someone who has chronic substance-induced psychosis? Obviously, you try to get them to stop using substances, but many times they just don't or won't. So functionally, what happens in the very imperfect world of clinical psychiatry is we essentially say, okay, well, will you at least try taking this antipsychotic too? Granted that they're going to keep taking substances, they're not stopping. The idea is, well, this person can at least get some guardrails such that despite continued use of substances, let's say they keep using meth and getting these floods of dopamine that make everything hypersalient, and they keep getting brought to the hospital by police, or they keep destroying property or threatening their family. Even if they keep using the meth or whatever it is, the antipsychotic can at least partially regulate the dopamine and serotonin from getting to that extreme level, causing that hypersalience.
But then again, what can happen with that is, say they're on an antipsychotic, which, are they taking it? They don't know. They're only speculating if they're med compliant. But say he's taking it, but then all of a sudden you need more of the drug to feel it, because the antipsychotic is cutting off some of the highs. So you can see where that can be problematic too, right? And then if there's actually antipsychotic drug withdrawal plus meth, that's a whole nother can of worms there too.
Okay, but the other issue is, with recurrent and heavy substance use, if you are getting psychosis with each intoxication, there sometimes can be a kindling such that the psychosis does continue. The fire keeps burning even when the substance is stopped. Particularly in developing brains, adolescence, and young adulthood, you are potentially permanently altering the dopamine limit thresholds in the striatum with these high doses, heavy substance use, and getting like a supersensitivity psychosis from that aberrant dopamine. And or you could just be causing neurotoxicity. I mean, we know that high doses of meth do cause neurotoxicity to dopaminergic neurons, for example. So sometimes you do get a durable psychosis that started with meth psychosis. It was substance induced, but then it becomes what we currently call schizophrenia once it persists for 6 months from stopping the drug. So that's all to say, there are people with a schizophrenia that is a purely organic, if you like, that is, it started with no substance use, seems to be more genetic or neurodevelopmental in some fashion. And that's more like something the person has in the perspectives model. It's the disease model. And then there are people with a pure substance-induced psychosis that is transient and eventually resolves with full washout of the substances and getting over the withdrawal. But there is also...
And that's a good breakdown of the possibilities, right? True schizophrenia that's made worse by drug use, and then drug use that mimics schizophrenia symptoms. How do you know which one it is? You get clean from the drugs and you see what's still present for the very most part. Also to note, meth does have some long-term consequences on the dopamine receptors, so that could also be problematic.
So this vast swath of middle ground, and oftentimes the schizophrenia label gets used for all of this. And I actually think that's to the detriment of our understanding of these processes, because to me, it's kind of like lumping things together that obviously have some kind of different pathophysiology, but I don't want to get into just talking about schizophrenia. But you can see how people might think of biological factors as the beginning of the thing. The biology is upstream to everything else, or the biology underlies everything else. But there are certainly things we can do, things that we do that feed back onto our biology, that change our biology. So again, these layers are constantly in flux with each other. Now, one additional thing I'll try to go into quickly. There are reports of Nick Reiner having had a medication change 3 or 4 weeks prior to the murders, at least at the time of this video, that's the report. I think this is probably too speculative here, but just as a sort of prediction that maybe one day, if it comes out, we'll see whether I'm right about this. I'm going to guess that he may have previously been on a full potency antagonist of dopamine, so a full potency antipsychotic, and that he hated it. He was either complaining about the side effects or stopped taking it, and that they then tried to put him on a partial dopamine agonist, something like aripiprazole, brexpiprazole, or cariprazine. Again, this is if medications played a role, but the reason for that would be a full antagonist, like a haloperidol or a risperidone, is like turning your dopamine receptors all the way off, just turning the switch off. Whereas a partial agonist like aripiprazole is like a dimmer switch, so restricting the light but letting some through. Now, a lot of people prefer these partial ones, and for good reason if they work for you. But for people that have had chronic psychosis and have been on a long-term full antagonist, it is like you got used to operating in the dark, right? All the switches were off, or all the ones the full antagonists were binding were off, and you were sort of operating in the dark, developing night vision. Then if you switch to a partial agonist, all of the switches get put on dim light, albeit, but light, and it's like a flood, and you get this kind of super sensitivity psychosis. You can actually get much worse suddenly from a switch like that. So having seen this, I would actually advocate for just a very gradual taper down from a full antagonist. Just so you're gradually getting less and less of your light switches turned off and adjusting to the light that way, rather than the sudden switch to the partial agonist. Okay.
And again, we don't know if that's what he was doing. Was he on a partial agonist or an anti-agonist? Which was he on? We don't know yet. So we'd have to see a toxicology report to know. But needless to say, those sound like some dangerous conditions there. And if that is the case, Alan Jackson's probably going to try to use that as part of the defense, is what I would guess.
Because it's like your eyes aren't adjusted in that case. But again, I'll say recreational drugs can certainly cause a supersensitivity psychosis on their own, because they're actually, operating on dopamine in massive spikes and crests themselves, crests and falls rather. So I'm not saying I think this is a med issue primarily. There's just not enough information on this, at least at this point. We need to move on to the psychological layer, the question of who the person is. So what is the personality?
And again, methamphetamines or other stimulant medication, while on those drugs that also work on the dopamine receptors, that could be a mess and real quick.
We might anticipate or glean in such a case. For one, again, remember all of the layers affect all the others. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but heavy substance use starting in adolescence, age 14 in Nick Reiner's case, or at least he went to rehab right before he turned 15 for the first time. That is going to have a massive impact on the personality. There is this sort of common wisdom by now that in some ways your development freezes at the time you start using heavy substances, or at the times an addiction starts.
I agree with that. I think it stunts your maturity until you stop. And then the maturing process picks up again. But if you're constantly using, especially when you're a teenager, that absolutely impacts the development of your brain. And for men in particular, the frontal lobe in the brain doesn't fully develop until you're 25.
Because it supersedes any other sort of developmental steps. It becomes the true north of your compass. So adolescents are simultaneously too self-aware and not self-aware enough. As they build up their personality and find their identity, they're constantly self-monitoring because, they're worried about how they're coming off. They need the feedback from their peers to establish themselves as a self. But oftentimes they're incorrect for a while about how they're coming off because, that's what learning is. You have to be wrong for a while in the things you're doing. And hopefully the mistakes you make are not such that you completely derail your life. Hopefully you have a supportive enough environment where you can make mistakes sort of safely as an adolescent. And I do feel for parents who can only do so much to create a supportive environment, given that another crucial part of adolescence is separating from the parents, expressing independence, etc. So rebelliousness, if that's what's necessary to separate from the parents, is in fact part of adolescence. And so what adolescents are looking for is their role in the world. Who am I? What am I good at? Where do I fit? Now, if this need is frustrated, there are some psychological strategies that seem to emerge. One is to construct a grandiose self, perhaps. So if the wound is, I am nobody, or I fit in nowhere, perhaps one kind of answer is, I must in fact be the most important person in the world. And if the world doesn't see that, that's the world's problem, right? This is a sort of way to protect the ego from being a nobody or for feeling like you haven't found your role. It's to say, in fact, I have this great role that other people don't understand. So that is. So
the grandiosity as a defense, that's something I've talked about many times on the channel because it's something that Dr. Peter Salerno and also Dr. George Simon, they wouldn't completely agree with that. They would think it's not always just a defense. Some people, that's just how they are. It's the old school way of seeing things where, oh, people must be so grandiose because they're covering up for some kind of insecurity. And again, they call that the compensatory type. And is that sometimes the case? I think sometimes. But is it every time the case? I don't think so.
Protective in some ways to a sensitive ego, especially. Another sort of strategy to address not finding your role would be potentially to lean into a negative identity. In other words, to say, well, if I can't be the best at something good, then I'll be the best at something bad, right? I'll be the best at being addicted. I'll do the hardest drugs. I'll be the manipulator. I'll be the con artist, this kind of thing, because at least that's somebody, you know.
And what does that sound like? That sounds like more antisocial traits. Now, antisocial personality disorder is the one that can't be diagnosed until you're actually an adult. But that sounds like what he's describing there, if you ask me, is those antisocial traits of trying to make that your identity. And again, which one it is, we're not really sure yet.
So you can see we're getting into the life story perspective here. And of course, I have to acknowledge the shadow of the Reiner Hollywood dynasty, which may indeed have felt like an impossible standard. And in Nick Reiner's life story, theoretically could have created this kind of who am I frustration, where it feels like the answer, the automatic answer, was only ever Rob Reiner's son, Carl Reiner's grandson. And that probably could not be a satisfactory answer by itself. You know, we all want in our core to be our own free selves.
Yeah, that it really clicked for me because we didn't bond a lot as a kid. Like he really liked baseball. I like basketball, and he could watch that with my brother, but baseball. But I just, when I saw him do that, and it was something that I'm interested in, I was like, wow, like he really knows a lot. And like, it made me feel closer to him and be like, yeah.
You're like, wow, my dad's Rob Reiner.
I never had thought about it. And then.
Yeah. It didn't cross your mind, right?
Never.
No.
Never watched A Few Good Men. Didn't see that one.
No.
So there, for example, making this point that, oh, we bonded because I got to see my dad in his element working on a movie, and it sort of clicked for me. Oh yeah, this is what he's an expert at. The host sort of says, it's like, oh, my dad's Rob Reiner. And this sardonic sort of, yeah, I never realized that before. Doesn't really seem like Nick thinks this is actually funny. He's not trying to really laugh about this. He's sort of like clenching his teeth a bit.
You're like, wow, my dad's Rob Reiner.
I never had thought about it. And then.
Yeah. It didn't cross your mind, right?
Never.
No.
Never watched A Few Good Men. Didn't see that one.
The reality behind the sardonic joke here is, of course, that he has been constantly aware
Yes.
that Rob Reiner is his father. And in fact, he was trying not to think about that part, but rather think of his role being a screenwriter working with a director, not his role just being Rob Reiner's son. The other thing to consider is that personality or character is in some ways just your particular collection of defense mechanisms. In other words, what do you do when times get tough? What do you do under great stress or under turmoil? That's where your character emerges. It's also where your personality pathologies might emerge, your defense mechanisms.
And again, this seems to be an older school type view here of, oh, the people that have grandiosity, the people turn into a jerk or an asshole. It's all just a defense. It's just a defense to cover up something. And that's just not a theory that I completely buy into anymore. I think it can be in some cases, but I also think there's cases where now this is just who they are. They're who they are, and what their innate traits are like. They're actually going to seek out environments that make those traits come out even more. And think of it like this: an introvert. Say you're an introvert, you're going to seek out environments that allow you to be more of an introvert, most likely, right? And so that's an example of us finding the environments to match our internal traits. So with him here, he could have some of this stuff be a part of him. It doesn't have to be this grandiose defense or some kind of ego defense mechanism. Not always.
So do you use healthy defense mechanisms like sublimation, humor, altruism, or perhaps do you revert to, say, grandiosity, fantasies of infinite power. Now, why am I even talking about grandiosity when almost nothing about Nick Reiner appears that way? He seems rather timid or maybe standoffish, but shy at times, right? Well, I would argue that there may be a private fantasy in some people that desires expression, but for the most part is too afraid of being deflated to dare express itself.
Nick, how involved were you with the casting and everything? I mean, this kid is amazing in the film. He's an incredible lead. I've never seen him.
People know Nick Robinson.
He was given good.
Yeah, he's a really good actor. I mean, he was in that.
So they're talking about the lead cast, the guy who plays Nick Reiner's inspired character. Nick Reiner starts saying he was given good writing, but checks himself because he realizes, oh, my dad wants to praise this actor. I'll hang back.
This kid is amazing in the film. He's an incredible lead. I've never seen him.
People know Nick Robinson.
He was given good.
Yeah, he's a really good actor. I mean, he was in that Kings of Summer and he's in Jurassic World. He's a great actor. And Nick was there for all the casting.
But the most important thing about that character trait is not the grandiosity itself, but the sensitivity to deflation, the ego sensitivity.
And what does that sound like? It sounds like vulnerable narcissism to me. And it's one of the rare cases where I would say, you know what? That's what vulnerable narcissism sounds like. Because there's also some evidence to suggest that vulnerable narcissism may actually be borderline personality disorder. But when I hear people like Dr. Mark Eatonson and others talk about vulnerable narcissism, this is what they mean. What he's acting like right here would be a version of vulnerable narcissism.
See, in the moment is sometimes this frustration with not getting to go all the way on Nick's part.
Yeah, from my own experiences and from also seeing other people going through it and also the varying establishments that I was in, you really get a sense for that whole world. So it's not like copy and pasted, but it's definitely derivative of, reality. Sort of like a 4-year process. Like first we started out with this like slapsticky half-hour comedy pilot that was horrendous. Bad jokes and everything. And he looked at it and was like, eh. And then
I just felt he could go deeper. He could go deeper with it. I mean, it was funny, but I felt the subject matter, should allow him to go deeper with it.
Yeah, well, that wasn't said at the time. It was sort of just like, this is trash. But anyways, we went along and.
So I think on one.
And again, that was super awkward that Nick treats his dad like that in public, like really disputes him and disagrees with him in front of everyone. It's like almost like he's trying to humiliate him, trying to make him look bad, is what it seems like to me. And what kind of kid does that? A kid who's being petulant, honestly, a kid who's being immature, a kid who might have a sensitive ego, that vulnerable narcissist streak. Yeah, let me humiliate my dad. Let me knock him down a peg. Oh, yeah, he's Rob Reiner. He directed Stand By Me and A Few Good Men, but let me knock him down a couple pegs, try to make him look bad.
One level, Nick Reiner likes getting to be the one who tells the story of being a screenwriter. He's trying to individuate live here on this interview, saying, here's what my process was like. And then, of course, my dad said it was trash, because he can't sort of help but try to get one of these pretty mild sort of cutting remarks, but meaningful perhaps. In terms of the life story.
And again, it's more passive aggressive, more of the covert variety is what it is. It's not outright aggressive. It's more covert, subtle.
I kind of see it as it being the closest Nick Reiner ever got to making a fantasy into a reality. The fantasy that he could, in fact, be his own Reiner, that he could be a Hollywood screenwriter, that he went on press tours, that he was getting interviewed. In some ways, I think this is when it seemed like things were going the best for Nick Reiner. He seemed to be coming out of his shell. He's finally, it's me getting interviewed. But at the same time, he cannot avoid the anger at these perceived slights. Like when he indicates that he didn't get to make any casting decisions other than one.
And what does that sound like? Hypersensitivity to criticism and perceived criticism. And then what does that sound like? A narcissistic trait.
He's a great actor, and Nick was there for all the casting, all of the auditions.
I was
and
sitting there, but
yeah, but you always gave your opinion.
I was like, I saw that girl Morgan Saylor on Homeland, and I think during the season she like went to rehab or something, and I was just like, oh, she's a perfect rehab girl.
Yeah,
that was the only.
He pushed for
That's kind of a creepy thing to say.
Morgan Saylor like crazy. Yeah.
You had a personal connection.
So Rob's sort of trying to give him credit for this one casting decision, but clearly Nick feels as though I was just sitting there sort of undermining what's supposed to be this moment of talking about collaboration by saying, yeah, I didn't really get to make any decisions.
And that's petulant, right? Rob's trying to build him up in a way. And granted, Rob's not perfect in how he does this either, but he's trying to give his son credit. He's trying to make him look good. But every attempt that he makes, Nick is undercutting it, trying to belittle him, being passive aggressive about it. And to me, it comes off as immature and petulant.
So if we fast forward to that party on December 13th, that's 9 years since the press tour for Being Charlie, a movie which, by the way, was critically panned and may have represented an even further deflation than his feeling talked over in the press tour interviews. But he essentially went into hiding sometime after that, or at least disappeared from the public eye. It's been, I believe, 7 years since he was on the Dopey podcast, where he'd made recurrent appearances for a time talking about recovery despite his ongoing active substance use, which he was upfront about on those calls. But in the interim, we really don't know what was happening, other than he seems to have quickly abandoned this last final thrust to establish himself as someone great, or at least in his eyes, someone doing something big. That is, he seemed to disappear from the public eye until his reintroduction to us under horrifying circumstances. But finally, if we are to consider the person behind the diagnosis, there is a misconception that when psychosis takes over, if psychosis takes over, the person disappears, that the disease replaces the man. But I don't believe that's really true. And in some ways, that's what makes it so difficult to watch. But personality does not vanish because of psychosis. I kind of think of the mind like a glass screen. This is just one analogy, but imagine your mind is projected onto this screen, and that psychosis can strike that screen and shatter it. But the thing is, screens don't just shatter randomly. There are certain fault lines or structural vulnerabilities that lead to certain somewhat general patterns or certain reliable ways that things fracture.
Interesting perspective there. I don't know if I completely agree with it, but I think there could be some truth in it. And I think the only way to really know this is someone who's experienced psychosis and someone who's been through it. What would they say about it? Now, the closest I've ever come is a drug-induced psychosis, but that's not quite the same. But if you could talk to somebody that has had true schizophrenia and psychosis and then was able to get stabilized, and then you ask them, what was the experience like for you? Who described it in a way that is most relevant to you, that you related to the most? Was it the way he just described it? Or is there another way to describe it? And Stephen King said something, speaking of Stand By Me, Stephen King said that we never feel our sanity leaving, we only feel its return. And when he talks about that, he's referring to addiction a lot of times, but I think that's a great way to put it.
And so you're left with this cracked screen and perhaps with some hypercoloration, some overly saturated portions of the screen, just as a person's mind will be altered in its coloration, will have some hypersaturation or hypersalience, but the movie playing on the broken screen still originates from the person. It just becomes distorted and twisted by the cracks and the colors of the break.
I agree more with that aspect of it, yes.
So in Nick's case, we see a young man who was reportedly insecure, perhaps feeling invisible in a family of giants, feeling prevented from becoming a self other than the rebellious substance user who did not want to listen to anyone. But it seems with a psychosis, whether substance-induced or otherwise, it took some of these insecurities and refracted them into some kind of terrifying internal logic that only he could understand.
And again, I've interviewed Dr. Keith Campbell. He's been on Joe Rogan's show, Jordan Peterson's show, and Chris Williamson's show. And he had said the vulnerable narcissist is the one that's living in their mom's basement. And they think they're just the best, but the world just hasn't recognized how awesome they are. And from what he's describing here and how Nick is, that's what it reminds me of, that vulnerable narcissist mentality. I'm amazing, but the world just doesn't see it. And then they're bitter and resentful and envious of other people's success. And in this case, Nick is envious of Rob's success and Rob's father, because Rob's father was also famous.
You know, at that party, asking people, are you famous? And then staring down someone who rebuffed him, potentially then being rebuffed publicly by the very person that he blamed with his internal logic for all of his prior failures, for all of his dashed dreams of becoming someone. I think this is a dangerous confluence. You know, when a mind is in a hypersalient psychotic state, when it's also extremely sensitive to slights of the ego, and because the internal logic, the disorganized logic, is beholden only to itself, the most heinous acts can suddenly be justified. So again, Nick Reiner is innocent until proven guilty. And what I have detailed is primarily a formulation of general principles of psychosis, ego sensitivity, and substance use. Thank you for watching. I'm sorry we had to talk under these circumstances.
Again, that was an interesting video. It gave me some different perspectives there. Now, what should we watch next? H.G. Tudor or Dr. Grande? Let's watch some H.G. Tudor. H.G. Tudor is a friend of the channel, by the way. I've interviewed him twice. Check it out. We had some interesting discussions.
Nick Reiner, danger, look at this. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. First of all, a housekeeping matter. I know a handful of you got overexcited yesterday as a consequence of the fact that I was saying Rob Reiner rather than Rob Reiner. Just so you're aware, first of all, I have a friend whose surname is spelled R-E-I-N-E-R, and it's pronounced Reiner. Perhaps it's because he's British. Also, I don't hear you singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, but there we are.
I love it.
But I understand that the correct pronunciation so far as the Reiner family is that it's not Reiner, it's Reiner. So I'll use Reiner. And those of you that got your panties in a bunch, well, you can relax now. Anyway, on to more important matters. A video has resurfaced. It's a YouTube video from a channel that seemingly belongs to Nick Reiner, and it's resurfaced following his arrest for the murders of his parents. The video is titled David and was uploaded to the site in 2016, and it shows Nick Reiner wandering around his home and neighborhood. It's a bit similar to his father's 1984 mockumentary film, This Is Spinal Tap, in that he answers questions from an off-screen interviewer. It appears that he's portraying a fictitious music magnate by the name David, although that's not made explicitly clear in the course of the video. Now, I can't provide you with the video to watch as a consequence of copyright restrictions, and therefore I can't provide it in the course of this video. What I've done is I've put it up separately on a non-monetized basis. So if you want to watch it, you can, so that you can make your own mind up about its content. It's just over 6 minutes in length. So you'll find it separately on the channel. I've incorporated some stills so you can see some of what's been going on in the video. And I also provide you with my observations about what's said in this video as assisting in making a determination as to what Nick Reiner may well be.
And this is the video where he said he was going to kill that fucking dog. That's this video.
And that what motivated him to apparently murder his parents. The content of the video is rather telling in that regard. There are a number of factors that come out of the video which are of particular interest. And the biggest one is that throughout the video, Nick Reiner speaks with a flat effect. Now, it might be considered that this is an affectation for the supposed character that he's playing in the video. But I do not think that that is an affectation for the character. I think this is his natural form of speech.
And I would agree with this by H.G. Tudor. And there's many reasons someone can have a flat affect. I think autistic people can have it. Psychopathic people can have it. It can be medication induced. There can be several reasons for it. And there can also be other mental health reasons for it as well. But let's see what H.G. Tudor says. And think of a flat affect. Think about Bill Belichick, the coach in now college football, but it used to be the Patriots. He's a great example of flat affect. At least how he talks to the press.
It's prevalent throughout. Flat affect is where there is a significant reduction or absence of emotional expression in a person's speech, facial expressions, or body language. Should you watch the video, you will probably notice that Reiner speaks with this flat effect. He doesn't move much in terms of body language. He's fairly still a lot of the time when he's speaking. His face is largely expressionless. Of course, he's wearing sunglasses, which makes it difficult to see what's going on with his eyes. But it's certainly the case that there is very much reduced body language, very much reduced facial expression, and a flat effect in his speech. In speech, this often manifests as a monotone voice with little variation in pitch, in volume, tone, or rhythm, even when potentially discussing emotional topics. It often makes an individual seem detached, uninterested, or even robotic. There are, of course, a number of underlying causes. First of all, there are psychiatric conditions. Flat affect is frequently associated with mental health disorders, where emotional processing is impaired. Typically, this might be schizophrenia and other psychotic disorders. This is one of the most common causes, where individuals may experience negative symptoms like diminished emotional expression. Speech can become flat as part of the overall blunted effect. Depression. Severe depression can lead to emotional numbing, resulting in flat speech as the person feels little motivation or energy to infuse emotion into their voice.
And again, and depression's a possibility too. And again, from what little I know of Nick Reiner, I just don't think schizophrenia. I think it's probably darker than that, is what I would think. But hey, maybe I'll be proven wrong.
Post-traumatic stress disorder. Trauma survivors may develop flat affect as a coping mechanism to avoid overwhelming emotions, leading to detached communication. 2. Neurological issues. Brain-related conditions can directly affect areas responsible for emotion and expression. For instance, brain injury or damage. Traumatic brain injuries, strokes, or other neurological damage can disrupt emotional pathways, causing flat speech and expressions. I don't think there's any suggestion that that's applicable here. Parkinson's disease or dementia. These progressive conditions can impair motor control and emotional signaling, leading to monotone voice patterns. Again, I don't think that that's applicable here. Neurodevelopmental conditions. Autism spectrum disorder. Some individuals on the autism spectrum may exhibit flat affect due to differences in emotional processing and social communication, although this is not universal. Again, I don't think that that's applicable in this instance. Certain medications, especially antipsychotics, antidepressants, or other psychiatric drugs, can blunt emotional responses as a side effect, leading to flat speech. I'm not aware of any medication that was being prescribed to Nick Reiner in 2016. So it's a possibility that could be an effect of medication. It's also the case that psychopathy is associated with shallow or flat affect because individuals experience limited emotional depth, an absence of emotional empathy, and reduced reactivity. This then can result in speech that lacks emotional inflection, appearing detached or unemotional, even in situations that would typically elicit strong responses. Not all psychopaths display this uniformly, but it's a recognized feature in descriptions of psychopathic affect. Throughout the video, Nick Reiner exhibits this flat affect. It's one of the most notable things that you see in it, both in terms of body language, facial expression, and in particular with regard to his voice. I've listed for you there a number of potential causes and highlighted the fact that psychopathy is one that may well be applicable to this situation. It's also the case that at numerous points throughout the video, drugs are being taken, smoked, and snorted. They are obscured, but it's evident what's taking place, which demonstrates a disregard for the legality of such behavior, and also the fact that it is being shown in a video, which is going to be uploaded to social media also, which is demonstrative of a behavior whereby there's a failure to conform to social norms in respect of lawful behaviors. Interestingly, at one point, he's asked, "Why did you invite young kids to sit by the campfire and read to them?" The response that's given, "That is totally falsified in every way." He then says, "Fuck Donald Trump. Nah, he's my man." He later appears with his sister. This is the individual that discovered the bodies of their parents. And it appears that he's referencing her boyfriend by saying she has a boyfriend who is in the military. He's actually dead. He died in Iraq. She moved to Patagonia, and she interrupts him to correct him to say that it was Pasadena. Although it might be the playing of a part, it also could be, of course, that what you're witnessing is just him and his personality, whereby he is dismissive and rude about the death of an individual and also showing a disregard for the feelings of another person. One point is particularly insightful, whereby the interviewer poses, guess it could have been awkward when Peter asked about you joining their team. It's not clear what the source of the awkwardness is, but then a dog barks, and you can see in the video that Reiner's response is of irritation to that interruption, and he announces, "I'm going to go and kill that fucking dog," which could well be an indicator of animal cruelty. Now, cruelty to animals, particularly where it's intentional and repeated, is widely recognized as a significant indicator of broader issues related to violence and antisocial behavior.
Correct. Anyone who's going to be violent to animals, especially as a kid, you got to watch out for that. Not a good sign. But here's the other thing to note. If you've watched The Sopranos, you know Tony Soprano. He loved animals. Hitler, he also loved animals. So it's not necessarily a cut and dry way to say, all right, this person loves animals, so they must be okay. Not always, right? But there's also people that hate animals, and it's absolutely a sign that, yes, it's a problem here. But don't get confused. I've seen some narcissistic people in particular, they'll treat their dogs better than they'll treat humans. So just don't see it in a black and white way.
Research consistently shows that individuals who abuse animals are more likely to commit violence against people. For example, animal abusers are 5 times more likely to harm humans compared to non-abusers. This includes domestic violence, child abuse, elder abuse, and other assaults. Animal cruelty often serves as a predictor crime or early warning sign, with studies indicating it can precede or co-occur with human-directed aggression. In households which experience domestic abuse, pets are frequently targeted as a means of control or intimidation. Abusers may harm or threaten animals to prevent victims from leaving. Childhood animal cruelty is a symptom of conduct disorder and is associated with antisocial personality disorder in adulthood. It correlates with traits like a lack of empathy, callousness, and impulsivity. All animals.
So Babu said something that's interesting here. Where is it? That is an expression like, you better get home or your parents will kill you. Now, again, that can be used as an expression, but if you actually hear the way that Nick said this expression, it was not joking in any way, and he sounded like dead ass serious. So again, things can be used as a figure of speech, but I don't think that that applies in this case.
Abusers don't necessarily develop full psychopathy, but repeated cruelty is linked to psychopathic features, such as shallow emotions and manipulative behavior. Animal cruelty can also be tied to a range of offenses, including property crimes, drug-related issues, and sexual abuse. It's sometimes considered a better predictor of certain violent crimes than other factors like prior homicide convictions. Naturally, not every instance of animal cruelty leads to human violence. Many cases involve isolated acts, curiosity in young children, or other non-predictive factors. Furthermore, not all violent offenders have a history of animal abuse, but it is strongest with intentional and repeated cruelty. And here we have an instance of a dog interrupting Nick Reiner with the consequence that he says, "I'm going to go and fucking kill that dog." Might that be another indicator with regard to potential animal cruelty, but also being a predictor of potential violence? We don't know if he has a history of such behavior, but certainly responding in that way may well be indicative. He's later asked, "Why do you like Snapple, the drink, so much?" He explains, "When I finish drinking it, I go in my room, put lotion in it, and stick my penis in it." This demonstrates an absence of a filter. Again, it might be suggested, well, he's just doing this for humor with regard to a character that he's playing. But to my mind, this isn't a character. This is actually Nick Reiner and the way that he behaves.
I agree with H.G. Tudor in this. With other people, it could be a character, but I don't think so in this case. I think, especially when you hear what the woman said that was working with him when Nick was an intern on the set of Family Guy, she had said Nick Reiner's dark and twisted. So, what must have Nick Reiner been doing or saying to be considered dark and twisted? So, we're seeing a pattern here.
He states at another point, sometimes I come outside to gather my sick thoughts. The video is interesting and has been picked up by mainstream media, particularly with regard to the threat that's made in relation to the dog. But overall, an analysis of the video does demonstrate certain danger signs. The drug use, the flat effect that is evident throughout, both in terms of body language, facial expression, and particularly speech, the suggestion of potential animal cruelty, and the general lack of filter that exists with regard to comments that he makes. All told, to my mind, this isn't somebody playing a character. This is demonstrative of the real behaviors of Nick Reiner, that you are being given a glimpse of how he actually behaves. And furthermore, that he thinks such behavior is appropriate for it to be filmed and to be placed on social media. And I would suggest that this video provides us with an early glimpse of quite possibly the psychopathic traits of this individual. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for watching.
And again, it's not necessarily the fact that it's dark humor. It's more about the tone and the energy behind the dark humor. There's a way to have it where it's more fun, playful. But with Nick, I don't really get that vibe at all from him. So now, should we go to Dr. Grande or some of the Dopey podcast breakdown or Hidden Killers? Let's see what Hidden Killers has to say. Because Dr. Grande, he's informative, but he's also kind of dry. New video. Why nobody could stop Nick or Mickey.
Welcome to the Hidden Killers.
Let's see. So many to choose from here. Holy mackerel. But there's one in particular someone said to go over. How Rob Reiner and his wife were hostages. Where is that one? This guy's got so many videos. Goodness gracious. I don't see this one video they're looking for here. Let's see what his most recent one is.
This is Hidden Killers Live with Tony Breuski, Stacey Cole, and Todd Michaels.
By the time Romy Reiner walked into her parents' Brentwood home on that Sunday afternoon and found them dead in the master bedroom, her brother Nick had been gone for hours. The murders allegedly happened early that morning. Nick reportedly checked into a hotel in Santa Monica, then somehow ended up walking the streets near USC, where he was arrested without incident around 9:15 p.m., caught on camera at a gas station buying a bottled drink like it was any other night. The murder weapon has not yet been recovered, but according to law enforcement, they have enough. So how did investigators piece this together so fast? And what does the evidence really tell us? Jennifer Coffindaffer, retired FBI special agent, with us to help us break this down and get a better understanding of the investigative end of this in our first part of the conversation here. Jen, Romy discovered her parents' bodies in the master bedroom around 3:30 on Sunday afternoon, allegedly,
and that'll probably give you PTSD for life. Walking into your parents' home and finding both of their throats slit in bed. Yeah, not too good.
The murders allegedly occurred far earlier that morning. When investigators arrived to a scene where the victims have been dead for almost half a day here, probably roughly 12 hours, give or take a little bit, what is the immediate priority at that moment in time for a scene like this?
Well, the immediate priority is safety. They're going to want to make sure that whoever did that isn't anywhere in and around that area. So they're going to be able to go in and do sort of a scene safety type clear. But remember, the biggest clue that they had when they hit the scene was Romy saying purportedly that Nick had done this. And so that was the first clue and kind of pointer as to what direction this investigation might be going.
And one person just saying that, obviously it's powerful. It's the sister that is just as close to this family as everyone is in that circle between her brothers and herself. So obviously she would be somebody to listen to, but there's obviously going to be more behind that statement. I would imagine that they went into questioning very early on in terms of what they knew and why she was saying that.
Yeah, absolutely. They would have had a very intense interview with her, and not just with her, with neighbors, with others. What did people see? They would have done a full-on canvas of that neighborhood. And in addition to that, they also got a search warrant very early on, even though it took a while to get a judge to sign it and to get in. And once they got in, they could find a lot of things. For instance, they specifically said there was no forced entry anywhere. So that always indicates that an individual who had direct access to that house was involved in the crime. They also would have seen just the area. In other words, was anything taken? Was anything disturbed?
And again, this all just says Nick's the one who did it. It's just a matter of what the defense is going to be. Probably not guilty by way of insanity is what they're going to try to go for. And again, and someone said to me, oh, you're going to give the lawyer a bad name for saying that. The lawyer's just doing his job. Like, his job is to give Nick Reiner the best possible outcome possible. That's his job. And if not guilty by way of insanity is the best outcome possible, that's the best outcome possible.
Or was really just the scene slaughtered.
Yeah. Do you think they would have interviewed people from the party at that point? I mean, do you think that those people were important to this as well?
They were. As soon as Romy would have had to give some of that. In other words, they were at a party. So now the party comes on the radar, and now you're dispatching detectives to go to speak with Conan O'Brien and other people that were at that party. So certainly that elevates the interviews that need to be done and need to be done quickly.
So again, so if those people at Conan's party were being interviewed after, and that's when they're saying, oh yes, we thought that Nick Reiner should have been on a mental health hold. Well, if they didn't say it until after, when they're being interviewed, that's different, right? It's one thing to be saying that during the party when you see the argument between Rob and Nick Reiner. But again, if it's just an argument and no one really knows the background, they just see that Nick's being a little bit creepy, okay. I could see them not saying to themselves, yes, the cops need to be called immediately. And they're probably thinking, I want to not embarrass Rob here and call the cops on his son. That's probably what they're thinking. But if they really know how severe it is and they know the history, now it's maybe more likely that they should have called the cops. But again, hindsight's 2020.
And I don't know if it's absolute gossip or what, but I read over the weekend that one of the last things that Rob Reiner had said to somebody was, I'm afraid for my life. I'm afraid my son is going to do something to me. Again, I don't know that that's actual fact, but it wouldn't surprise me that if that's the reason they brought him to the party, they were concerned. There was something going on. He didn't quite fit in at the party, but they brought him anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been reading so many rumors and so many things being said. And of course, I always say with every rumor, there's at least a grain of truth. And that was one of the last questions I always ask when I conducted an interview is, have you heard anything? Were there any rumors? And oftentimes those don't ferret out completely to be the accurate rumor or the accurate truth, but they're pretty good pointers as well.
Reports indicate that Nick had checked into that Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica sometime after the alleged murders and ended up 15 miles away near USC by the time he was arrested. From an investigative standpoint, how do those movements factor into kind of reconstructing his actions and his state of mind? Because that's going to be a big thing here in these hours before and after the murders, especially if they're going to be looking at consciousness of guilt or anything of that nature, or that he had his mental, faculties about him to perform this in a way that he knew what he was doing.
It's going to be critical because I think it seems like one of the obvious directions the defense could be going is issues with his mental state, right? An insanity type plea or an insanity type defense. But this is the litmus test. Did he know what he did was wrong? It's as simple as that. You can be as crazy as Tudor Brown, but if you knew what you did was wrong. And so by him leaving the scene, he showered up. He was seen later, walking around, as you mentioned in your intro, as if it was just any other day. That's a problem. That's a problem for that defense.
I would agree with that. I would certainly agree with that. That part speaks to he knew what he did. The same with putting the curtains, covering the curtains. That speaks to an awareness too. Now, is it always the awareness of that? Maybe not always, especially if there's like tweaking out on meth involved, but the cleaning, etc., makes me think he knows what he did, which is not good for the defense.
Is it a problem for the defense showing that he knew it was wrong? Because I guess you could also look at it in the way of he's living a normal day after doing this. Doesn't that show in some ways that he didn't know what he did was wrong, because he's just about going and getting a Diet Coke or whatever the hell he was buying at the gas station there. That to me sometimes would say this person truly has no clue what the hell they just did.
No, it's not true at all. They're going to go live their life. Like if you have impaired empathy or a lack of empathy and you do something psychotic, you're not going to act the way a normal human would when they do something like they actually feel remorse for. So again, people think that these people are just like us. They're going to do what we would do if something like this happened. But it's just not true. They're going to be different. They're going to just go about with the rest of their day like that. And do you really think, like, say Nick doesn't get caught right away? Is he going to be the kind of person that gets racked with guilt about it and be like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I did this? Probably not. He's probably going to go on the run. He'd probably go on the run and like freaking just get out of there is what I would think.
This is how they're going to be acting, to look at it from the other angle.
But how many times did he ever check into a Santa Monica hotel? So they're going to be looking at routine. Is that something he normally did? Or was it truly to get rid of evidence? Also, where's the knife? Also, did he bring the knife? Or did he use one from the house? There's this great surveillance video showing him walking around in the middle of the night before the murders too. A lot of people don't realize that there's actually 2 sets of video. There's the soda one, and then there's the one before that.
And again, about Rob Reiner's roast, to go back to that, yeah, troubling, especially from a 2025 lens, right? So it gives me a little bit of the ick, but I don't know what it was. There's no evidence of anything happening outside of that. They'll say, oh, he's associated with Epstein, but that's the closest thing they'll say to evidence. Outside of that, there is no evidence. It's just people speculating. So I'm not going to say one way or the other, oh, yes, there's definitely proof of this, or this. No, I'm not going to say that. I
find that a very interesting video. He's not staggering. He doesn't look at all under the influence, at least from what we can glean. And hours later, he murdered his parents.
Do you need the murder weapon? Is that necessary in a case like this?
You don't need the murder weapon, but it's always nice to have. Obviously, his DNA could be on there. He could have fingerprints on there. They want to be able to.
Here's a good question to address now that someone's asked the question. Locus says, quick question. If you are the wizard of radical self-respect, how come you don't have a single video about how you were able to realize your own self-respect? All of your videos analyze others. And I would say that's more true of the last 2 to 3 years. But originally, that is all I talked about, is practicing radical self-respect. And the reason I came up with it was because after I got out of a relationship with a female narcissist, I asked myself, what could I have done differently to prevent this situation from happening? And the answer I came up with was practicing radical self-respect. And I wrote a whole ebook, audiobook called Practice Radical Self-Respect, Avoid Falling for the Same BS. So I've talked all about it, my journey defining it. The issue I ran into was nobody cared. Nobody cared that I talked about radical self-respect. No one cared about my thoughts about mindset until I gave them the pain point that they could also relate to, that I had also experienced. So I'd been through narcissistic abuse in the family and romantic relationships. And so I started talking about that to funnel people into my thoughts on radical self-respect. Again, I didn't want to have to start talking about that, but that's just the way it was. That's how the cookie crumbles, they say.
Match that weapon to the wounds. They want it, but you can do cases without them.
What I think a lot of people are looking at now that we've learned more about the schizophrenia diagnosis, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, but it kind of plays into this. If one knew, okay, your son is not in a great spot right now, mentally, there's a medication change going on. You are going to this party this evening and you're concerned about your son, so you decide to bring him. I guess it's the judgment call that the Reiners made to bring him that I think a lot of people are wondering about. But I'm not saying this in a way to disparage Rob and Michelle Reiner. I'm saying this more in a way of, this kid had these 2 bamboozled in such a way that they thought this will be the best course of action. This will be the best thing for him, is to take him out to this event. Because I don't for a second think that Rob and Michelle would ever want to or intend to put their son or anyone else into any form of danger. But if you're believing the addict, if they have you convinced of this is the best route, that's a scary place to be in. What's your thoughts on just that whole thing? The fact that they brought him to the party, when clearly, it might have been a night of, we're going to have to stay home, guys.
Right. Look, this is a 32-year-old man. They have all of this history, knowing his issues. To me, I wonder how many other parties they brought him to over this extent, 2 decades of time plus that they have spent with having issues with their son. So how I see it was probably, this is not their first rodeo. This had probably happened before, that they had to take him someplace. And they really didn't have the, lights and sirens going off in their brain that something bad could happen. And that's why they took him. I bet it happened before, Tony.
Well, again, it's the frog in the boiling pot. They've been so used to this for 32 years with him or however long it's been going on, that to them, he's just having an episode. He's having a downtime. To everybody else, it looks like, holy shit, what is going on here? And that's why people were so alarmed at the party. They've been steeped in it for years. To them, it was probably, yes, we're extreme, but we're kind of used to it.
Yeah. It was just another night, another night where, it's kind of a rough spot, but how many rough spots have they gone through with him?
Exactly.
And if it's never ended in anything like this, it's probably not on your radar that it's going to end, like this. And certainly there are reports that it got violent and horrible by Nick's own account of destroying the guest house, but not to the point of murder. And I guess that's an interesting place to be when you get so conditioned for so long of it's bad, but it's not quite that bad, because everybody thinks, well, that there's a line that won't be crossed until it actually is.
Yeah, I agree, Tony. And then also, I do think that the events of that night were the trigger. I really do. Whether we want to call it the straw that broke the camel's back or the proximal event that led to this explosion. But I think he was embarrassed and ashamed, and maybe he had been made to feel like that, or he felt like that. I'm not going to say anybody made him feel this way. You make yourself feel the way you feel. But that was the trigger, and I really believe it was, by the.
And again, for those who don't know what the frog in a boiling pot analogy of abuse is, if you throw a frog in a boiling pot of water, it jumps right out. But if you put a frog in a pot of water and you slowly turn up the heat, the frog will boil to death and not jump out. And this is what happens in an abusive relationship, where it's not terrible right away, but the temperature gets turned up slowly over time. It's very subtle at first, but then before you know it, that water's boiling and you're in a terrible situation. And at that point, you're in a trauma bond. A trauma bond is when you're attached to someone who is abusing and mistreating you. And a trauma bond is just like a drug addiction. And if you cut and break a trauma bond, there'll probably be withdrawal, just like a drug addiction.
Accounts were reading. He was embarrassed and tired of the embarrassment, maybe.
It seems like he was seeking that out, though. If it wasn't, who did say, hey, private conversation here, guys, it would have been somebody else. It would have been anybody. He was going to intrude on whatever he needed to intrude on. So someone would snap at him, so he could go be the victim, so he could go have whatever episode he needed to have. I feel like this is something where I don't think anyone could have won on this one. He was acting, in like an idiot. He was acting incompetent. He was acting like an addict. He was acting in such a way that anyone would have been put off by him, and they clearly were. So when you have something like that, is it the chicken before the egg? Is it, somebody? I don't think anybody's going out of their way to be an asshole to him. I think it was he's putting himself in a position where he's going to get that sort of reaction.
No, I agree with you, and I'm sure it had happened many other times in his life. That they had been embarrassed by him.
And again, this is not their first rodeo with him either. I mean, considering everything, if I'm Nick Reiner's parents, if I'm Rob Reiner and his wife, I have much firmer boundaries with it. I'm not going to be letting him stay in the guest house when he is going to brag about trashing the guest house. It's like, who do you think you are? Like, you're going to be that entitled that you're going to trash the guest house that we let you stay at? I would have boundaries. And this is a situation where maybe you cut off one of your kids. And again, people act like that never happens. But this is a case where maybe that would have been appropriate considering how Nick was acting. And then some people would say, well, you're going to turn your back on your kid that's struggling with mental health and addiction. And I would say, well, sometimes they give you no choice. If they're not going to meet you halfway, what can you do? You can't make the horse drink if you lead it to water. This is not going to happen. So if he's not going to put in those action steps, he's going to continue to use, then you got to protect yourself. You got to protect yourself, your wife, and the rest of the family. And it's also the best thing for him too, because now look what happened. Now, the best case, he's going to be in some sort of mental hospital for the rest of his life. What kind of life is that?
And how he behaved. But nevertheless, this was the proximal event to what happened.
Sure.
And then again, We don't know what happened later when they got home. If they said, listen, you're out of here. We're just done. You're 32, get a job, go on the streets, but we're done. We don't know what happened. So there is a big empty space that we might not ever know.
Putting up boundaries with an addict or add mental illness to addiction, they usually do go hand in hand in many ways. And you put those boundaries up to those people, you don't know what the hell you're going to get. And that's the scary part with that. Nick,
I mean, and that's true. It's true you don't know what you're going to get. But now that you didn't do that, now you're dead. Now you're dead. And of course, you could say that's not a common occurrence. True. It's not a common occurrence, but in rare cases, the right variables fall into line and boom, this can happen. But my philosophy is the radical self-respect philosophy. And again, it's the hardest when it's one of your kids. I'm not trying to downplay that in any way. But I would have said to Rob Reiner, hey man, you got to have boundaries with him. You can't let him walk all over you. You can't enable him. You can't coddle him. You can't believe his lies when he just wants to continue to use. You got to know what version of him you're talking to. I had a friend named Dean, and his little brother was a good kid. He's still alive. But Dean was an opiate addict. And he would always say to him when he was talking to him, if he hadn't seen him for a while, who am I talking to? Fiend Dean or Clean Dean? Because he understood they were two different people. Fiend Dean is the lying, manipulating version. Clean Dean, that's a little bit different. So that's what I would have said to Rob. Like, okay, he's got to start doing his own thing. And if he isn't, you're not helping him. You're not helping him by letting him stay in the guest house. You're kind of enabling this prolonged adolescence of his.
Reiner was diagnosed with schizophrenia years ago. He was in treatment, expensive treatment, at a facility that reportedly charges $70,000 a month. He was under psychiatric care, and according to multiple sources, his medication was changed 3 to 4 weeks before the alleged stabbing took place of both of his parents. The defense attorney is Alan Jackson. Yes, that Alan Jackson. He's already calling the case very complex publicly. Translation, the insanity defense is coming. So the question now isn't just what happened. It's whether Nick Reiner understood what he was doing when he did it and whether that matters. With us, Jennifer Coffindaffer, retired FBI special agent, to help us break it all down. Alan Jackson's first words outside of the courthouse in this case were, quote, "It's a very complex and serious issues." Obviously, when a high-profile defense attorney is using language before the arraignment even happens, what do you think he's signaling about his strategy, Jen?
Well, he's signaling that he's going to use every complex issue he can to excuse the behavior of Nick Reiner in this.
Of course, he's going to use the not guilty by reason of insanity. Or just like that other doctor was saying, Andrew, he said, depending on that medication, coming on and off those medicines can give you some psychotic-like symptoms. They might try to use that too, if indeed he was on those medicines. But we don't know. He's just speculating he's on those medicines. But he might have been on a different kind of antipsychotic. We don't know.
Murder. I expect the kitchen sink. It's going to be everything from insane due to his schizophrenic nature. It's going to be the drugs made him do it. And don't be surprised if you hear about abuse that won't be able to be proved, but will be thrown out there as a red herring. I just expect it all from this guy.
Yeah.
I hope that doesn't happen, because this is a beloved Hollywood human being. I mean, this is somebody that a lot of us have grown up with. We've watched his movies. We've followed him for years. I watched The Princess Bride 2 weeks ago, for F's sake. I mean,
favorite quote from Princess Bride? Go. My favorite quote is, life is pain, Highness. Anyone who tells you differently is selling you something.
You can't drag him through the mud. You just can't. So Alan's got to walk a fine line here.
You can only drag if there's evidence.
True.
But Nick, his words, that's not evidence.
Right.
That's the problem. And unless there is some sort of evidence behind any of that, that's what my concern is too. Because I feel like And I hope not. I hope we don't get there. But I'm wondering right now, the fact that the schizophrenia thing is out there, I think we can make a reasonable guess as to where this information is coming from. It's probably from the defense, and it's probably the beginning of a PR campaign to humanize Nick, to get empathy for Nick, and look at he's schizophrenic and he was trying to get help and it didn't work. How well do you think this is all going to land on the general public in this case?
Well, if history is any indication, we've seen already in this case that it's not landing very well. While I think people are certainly sympathetic to individuals who are struggling with addiction and struggling with mental health, everyone understands that there's a lot of addicts and there's a lot of people struggling with their mental health, and they're not murdering their parents and
Yeah, without a doubt. Nick's medication was reportedly changed 3 to 4 weeks before the murder. Sources say it made him more erratic and dangerous. Legally, how does a documented medication change factor into the insanity or diminished capacity defense? And after that, I want to talk about, are others going to be facing any sort of repercussions here if this is how the medication management was taking place?
And this is the part I'm curious about. So I'm curious what the FBI folks here are going to say about this. What can you say in terms of medication and withdrawal? As long as you can prove that they were prescribed to you. Interesting. It'd be interesting to know what you can do and not do with that.
$70,000 bill, allegedly. But let's go to the first part.
You know, that piece is very interesting to me, because you would think that for that type of money and for this type of diagnosis and treatment regimen, you would have him in some sort of inpatient situation, especially if you're going to change the meds. Now, my guess is Nick wanted nothing to do with being inpatient anything. And we don't even know if he was truly taking that medication. You can be prescribed a lot of things and it can sit right there on the shelf. And a lot of individuals who struggle with mental health do not want to be medicated. Thus the reason they're in crisis all of the time. So we don't even know what he was really taking. So to your point, I think it would be very difficult to go after the doctor or the institution or hospital, whatever, that was responsible for treating him. I really do.
It's going to be difficult. It would be difficult to hold any doctors accountable for this. You would have to be able to prove some gross negligence and like them being aware of something and then doing something anyway. You just don't see it very much. You don't see that happen very much. The psychiatrists and friends, they have a lot of protections because they're friends with Big Pharma. Big Pharma protects their friends, unfortunately, for the rest of us. But in terms of the medications, I mean, we don't know. We don't know because we haven't seen the toxicology report. So until we see that, this is all just speculation. So take that into consideration.
The price tag, I think, is what gets everybody, but people can charge what they want. And if that's what the Reiners were willing to pay, and it may not be this magical inpatient center that one would think you would get for $70,000 a month, then it doesn't have to be. And I guess I wonder if this is just going to expose anything in terms of exorbitant medical costs, for those who can afford it, and what are you actually getting that's different than folks who are offering literally the same sort of services for lesser cost. I wonder if it's going to shine any sort of light onto that here.
Doesn't feel like much of a testimonial for the people that were helping him, does it?
Yeah, no, you're right. And I think truly that it shows just the huge hiatus between people who are worth $200 million and people who are worth $20,000 and what they can afford. I mean, let's be fair. $70,000 a month might be more like $70 a month to you and me, even though it's crazy and over the top in terms of a price tag. The amount of money that he would still be bringing in just from royalties.
Right. I mean, $70,000 a month to Rob Reiner is nothing, but they probably made the mistake of thinking more expensive equals better care. And not always. Not always. And again, regardless of the cost of the facility, you can't give that person willingness to change. Whether it's $5,000 a month or $70,000 a month, if that person's not willing, that's what matters.
Else would be unbelievable. And so they could afford it. And he had the best, but the best or the most expensive doesn't mean the best.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it's this whole thing we look at and we just go, I mean, it was so preventable. If there were more safeguards in place for situations like this. When you're looking at the big picture, you have the option of, well, you can go throw him onto the street and hope he doesn't die. And it looks like they did attempt that several times. And he kept coming back alive. Then you put him into treatment ungodly amounts of times. Then he convinced him that treatment wasn't working. So they found something in the middle where they were believing their addict son, but there's nothing in that middle ground where we don't believe our addict son, but he's not willing to get the help that he needs. You only have those two options because you can't forcibly commit somebody unless we're talking about having the conservatorship put into.
And so if he's not willing to get help, Rob and his wife needed boundaries, preferably limited to no contact. And you wouldn't be inviting them to parties if that's what you're really thinking. Like, think about that for a minute. If Rob Reiner is petrified of his son and thinks that he can hurt him, you think a good idea is to invite him to a party at Conan's house? What? That makes no sense to me. That reeks of him being naive or stupid or something. But ideally, what would happen is you get him stabilized in a mental hospital, get him clean from the drugs, then get him stabilized on some medicine. If he's unwilling to do that, boundaries. Boundaries, cut him off. Don't give him access to your house. That's what I would have said to do.
Place, which allegedly they were beginning to look into doing. Is that something, that conservatorship, that lever of the law, is this?
We got a super chat here that I missed. Thank you for this. I got to find it up here. It says, Jennifer, thank you. As a bipolar person, mental illness alone doesn't make you do that. You have to have somehow give yourself permission to hurt people, in my honest opinion, but I can't really be objective about this. So I'll say this. It's not bipolar that does it. It has to be a character issue plus personality disorder issue plus maybe some substance use too, is what I would say. So something like bipolar disorder can be comorbid with anything. It can be comorbid with psychopathy. It can be comorbid with narcissism. It can be comorbid with borderline, right? So when that's the case, that can also be a part. And of course, addiction can be comorbid with bipolar. So there's so many variables at play. But thank you again for that, Jennifer.
Going to be a case that maybe makes us think about this a little bit more on reality's terms. People, I think, villainize that whole idea of conservatorship with the whole Britney thing. And I say, look at this. Do you think she's better off now than where she was before? Judging by knife play naked on TikTok, that doesn't seem like she's in a great place mentally. It seems like there was a reason for it. I would say that's probably something that Nick should have had. But again, you have to move heaven and earth sometimes, depending on where you're at, to get a conservatorship. Do we need to re-examine the insane amount of hoops of fire one has to jump through when they're just trying to save someone that they love from themselves?
Yeah, I think the conservatorship situation does need to change, Tony. It shouldn't take an act of God. It should take evidence that is beyond a reasonable doubt that the individual needs to have somebody else making their legal decisions, inclusive of their treatment decisions for them. In other words, he needs to be put in an inside treatment facility, not exterior treatment facility, even something like that. This is what was clear to me. The Reiners, and we all have family, friends, somebody we know that has been through this, that has a child or a relative that is out of control. And I really feel for them. And it's not like they weren't trying. It's not like they abandoned their
Ramey's a pretty girl there.
son. I mean, they did everything they could, and then look at what he did. Listen, I don't have much sympathy for Nick Reiner. I think he knew what he did was wrong. I think that's why he fled to that hotel room. That's why he washed off. And I think that, I think he knew what he did was wrong. I think he's a bad seed. I'm sorry, I'm going to say it.
I agree.
I agree with Jennifer here. I think he's a bad seed too. He doesn't pass the vibe check. Doesn't pass the vibe check or the energy check, regardless of what drugs he was on and regardless of whatever else. And what's the bad vibe check? Usually personality disorder type stuff, dark energy. That's what I see. So regardless of all the rest of it, his case might give people with mental illness a bad name, but I don't think you can blame the mental illness. I think it's more of a personality disorder type issue, a character issue.
I think that there was nothing more that could have been done for him, short of forced being admitted in a facility where this is, you're here, you have no choice, you are a danger to yourselves. And I think it would have just been still a life of torture because he had a very broken brain. But I think that would have been the only thing that would have kept him safe. But we don't have the levers to push that unless the conservatorship could have gone into place. But obviously that did not happen. The death penalty is on the table in a case like this. But with the fact, number one, it's California. So your odds, unless there's some sort of dramatic governmental change.
Death penalty is on a stay in California. So he's not getting the death penalty.
In California, nobody's getting the death penalty anytime soon. But even if he were to get it, now that we have schizophrenia on the table, and if that is truly a real diagnosis that he has, which it very likely is, how do you think that plays into the possibility of the death penalty? Plus, they're going to be consulting the family. The Reiners were not pro-death penalty folks, as far as I think most would understand.
I don't think there's any chance the death penalty comes into play here.
Yeah.
People are talking about it and throwing it around, but no way. With the mental issues that they're putting on the table, with the drug issues, and with the fact there's a moratorium right now, as you referred to.
Exactly. And not to mention just how famous he is as well and who he is. That shouldn't matter, but in reality, it absolutely does matter. He would probably be, who's the most famous person to ever get the death penalty? I can't even think of one. At least in recent times, I should say. Back in the day, that's a different story.
On the death penalty cases in California anyway, no way. There's way too many special circumstances that are going to serve as sort of mitigation for what he did.
Yeah, it's just horrible all around, and I don't know that I can't imagine the kids. Nobody can speak for them, but I can't imagine that they're wanting to end in another death. I mean, I can't imagine what they're going through. I just can't. But yeah, you're right. So many of us have seen this sort of thing play out, maybe not to this extreme, but folks who have a loved one, a child, quite often that just out of control and their hands are completely tied. And this, while it's on a huge scale because of who these people are, these sort of things play out, not always ending.
Well, that's interesting. By Ellie's Life down here. My friend Eric would be an amazing guest on your show regarding this topic. He has schizophrenia and was forced to be treated. Now he is a spokesperson for mental health trying to change. Now that's exactly what I said before, right? Anyone who's been through this, they can speak very specifically about the situation. Okay, he has schizophrenia. Was he also self-medicating schizophrenia with drugs? Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But maybe I'll try to find this Eric person and add him to as an addendum. Which, to me, I think they're some of the best sources for this kind of stuff, honestly. Because I like hearing things from the horse's mouth. Oh, you lived it? I'd want to hear what you have to say. Same thing with like addiction recovery, right? You want to go to somebody that's lived it. They've done it. So they're not talking out of their ass.
In the death of the parents, but play out in families every single day across the country with people with their hands tied, the same way that the Reiners did. It shows money does not solve everything by any means.
And these are the people we see and we walk by, for those of us who live in the downtown area. These are the people that are struggling with these very issues. And they would rather, and remember this is out of Nick's mouth, a paraphrase, he would rather be on the streets in Maine and Jersey, Texas, and for all those years than be, institutionalized or in a rehab place. So that says a lot to me right there.
Yep, I agree.
That's frightening as we finish up our Christmas shopping.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Yeah, the busy mall.
Let's go over to another story. A Kentucky sheriff calling dead relatives on his phone, staff watching him spiral.
All right. That's the end of that story. So if someone can tell me who broke that down, because there's hours and hours of the Dopey podcast, I'm not going to go through that all. But if you can give me someone that actually did some of it, I can look at it. Boop. Lost you all for a minute. Where is it though? I didn't get anything. On Instagram? Yeah, I clicked the wrong button for a second. Where did you send the link? Because I didn't get any links in the comments here. I mean, like I played some of this the other day, and it just was just like him being like a little bit of a pissant, honestly.
Always 2020. So
Let's see what Dr. Grande has to say.
well, this is Dr. Grande. Today, I would like to offer an update on the Rob Reiner case. This video is going to be a bit more informal. I want to talk about...
I'll take a look at it before we go into Dr. Grande. This better be good.
Where'd you get this weed?
Say and spell your first and last name for me.
Well, I ain't gotta tell you my first and last name. Most people know me as David.
We're wondering what...
how long this interview is gonna be?
You know, it's real unfortunate to say, but I can't really help but mention that I expected something like this to happen, okay? Talking about Rob Reiner and Nick Reiner, the murderer, the one who killed his own father and his father's wife, right? Rob Reiner is now claiming that he has a whole bunch of mental issues, okay? He's pleaded not guilty by means of insanity. Now, we've seen this a whole bunch of times. We've seen this over and over. This is not the cop-out that you think it is, okay? You're still going to go to jail for 20-some years. You're just going to be in a different facility. But nonetheless, he's pleaded not guilty, and the reason for that is that he's gone to certain rehab facilities multiple times. I'm talking not 1, not 2, not 5, not 10, not 12. He's gone there so many times that it's hard to keep track. Some people say it's 16, some people say it's 17. Nick Reiner has been sent to rehab for more times than you probably go to the dentist in your entire life. Okay? Nick Reiner is over here claiming schizophrenia. You know what I mean? The demons are talking to him. He can't really help himself because, you know, he's a little kooky, he's a little crazy. The demons. In my opinion, I think it is mental health. I think he does have mental issues, but I don't think it's schizophrenia. Sure, he's diagnosed. Sure, this, that, and the other. But I think this guy is a genuine.
I don't see anything from the podcast here, though. Yeah, this is,
you know, a couple of weeks in this homeless shelter in Maine, and I got exposed to some crazy stuff. Wow. And this one guy, like, said that you can shoot up crack or something like that.
Vinegar, lemon
if you
juice.
put it in lemon or something. Yeah. So
that's Chris's shit right there. That's
it's so easy to buy crack. You can never buy powder on the street.
So I wasn't questioning anything. Yeah. I was going with the flow, and he gives me all the works. And he says, go into outside the McDonald's. And he says, go inside and do it. I said, because at that point, I had never done it myself. I said, I don't know how to do it. Like,
Ladies and gentlemen, I just spent the good part of 3 hours watching none other than a Nick Reiner podcast.
All the big shows. You're on fucking Howard Stern. Well, I mean, you're probably
the movie wasn't big. I think the topic was big because
your dad is big. And the release was big. It was in the Daily News. It was in a lot of places. I saw it around.
I know, but it was just released in like a couple of theaters. So like it was. I think. Oh yeah, sorry.
No, please. No, because you know better than I do.
You don't sound like. Did you like the movie, or is it?
You didn't love the movie?
I feel like I didn't get to express how I truly felt in it.
Well, that was where I was going to.
And so here's the thing. There's many different versions of drug addicts. There's many different versions of mental health. And there can even be different versions of personality disorders too. It's not going to be a one-size-fits-all phenomenon. But when people hear about this kind of thing, they often will want to generalize it and say, oh, all addicts can do this, or all mentally ill people can do that. And it's really not true. Each case needs to be taken individually. And again, my sense about this guy is more of a dark vibe, character disturbance, vulnerable narcissism, maybe even psychopathy. That's my vibe. That's what I get from this. That's not a diagnosis either. That's just the vibe that I get.
Creative control did you have?
1/3, and 1/3 technically, and 1/8 realistically.
Okay. Well, this is the first question. It's like the story is supposed to be, and I'm not talking about the story of the movie. I'm saying in order to promote the movie, you kind of have to be sober. You kind of have to be a poster boy for recovery, and you didn't want to be that.
I said to them, "Listen, I'm not in the position to do this. I'm not a quote unquote sober guy. I'm going to have to go on to these talk shows." They said, you got to do it. They want the whole.
And notice how different he sounds here too, right? His dad's presence isn't here. He sounds more comfortable, more like himself, more mask off, dare I say.
Father-son angle. It just shows you how disgusting the PR.
Of course.
I mean, just the story.
And don't try to put it on the PR people for making them be the disgust. Oh, it just shows how disgusting the PR people are, and they just care about ratings. They need the angle. Sir, you went to fucking rehab and you wrote a story about getting clean or about the struggles on drugs. Obviously, they're gonna assume that you're at least attempting to be sober when you show up. I mean, listen, I'm not a sober guy either, you know, but if somebody was to tell me like, hey, Alan, don't drink no beers, don't smoke no weed, I need you to show up fully sober. I can show up fully sober. And, you know, you might say, oh, he's addicted, this, that, but I'm not that addicted. You know, it's like, holy shit, you can't come to an event without getting high or drinking.
And there's different versions of addiction, different levels of severity as well. When it comes to opiate addicts, if you're addicted to opiates, you need opiates every day at that point. If you're on heavy, like crack is a drug that you can binge. Coke is a drug that you can binge. Often meth, you can binge meth too, but since meth is so long acting, you will also be able to sustain it for longer a lot of times. And then often you won't sleep either. You won't sleep and you can be up for days at a time. So there's different levels of severity of addiction for sure.
Oh, I'm not in the position to be the poster boy of sobriety. Motherfucker, you need to be there for 2 hours. Get high any other time. But
And of course you can binge any drug, but some drugs are much more prone to being binged than others. Coke, for example, constantly you do lines and then it wears off in 45 minutes to 90 minutes and you do more and you do more and you do more and you do more. Like, that's just the nature of the beast. Same with crack. You go until you run out of money. And that's it. And a lot of people, when they binge drink, it can be the same. You don't see that as much, for example, with weed. Weed's a little more self-limiting.
find it's kind of funny that he's bitching about even those aspects of a movie that's about sobriety. But don't worry. The more we listen to this person, I was gonna say my psychopathic. I want all my schizophrenic gang to comment in and weigh in. Does this man have schizophrenia? Because I know we got some people who probably pop a few pills for the schizo, right? What do you think about this? I think the schizophrenia diagnosis is bullshit. I mean,
I agree with him.
We're in California, baby. LA. Man, hold $20,000 and give me
Actually, I'll amend that. I'm not completely ruling it out, but I don't think so. I don't think that's what it is.
prescription for schizophrenia or some shit. Who knows? I'm just saying that can easily happen. But let's get back into it.
So I just went out there and I just realized, look, I'm have a voice to some degree. I'm gonna say what I gotta say while I'm here.
At least you didn't sell out. You know what I mean? You stuck to your guns.
Yeah, I'm not gonna. No, yeah.
But you would say you were like, I'm sober today, and you didn't you didn't want to get into the water, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure it put you in a really bad spot.
It did. It was hard.
Was it really uncomfortable?
Yeah. It was uncomfortable, but I felt like it was like part of the job, part of what I had to do.
It was the job. Let me ask you a question. You don't have to answer.
No, I like where you're going.
Would you get high afterwards, after the appearance?
Yeah, I would. I'd smoke a joint on the roof of my apartment.
Let me ask you something
after.
else.
Please answer the question.
And the way he is here, I doubt he smoked weed before this. He did some kind of upper, whether it was dope, and even to some people, dope can be like an upper too, but more like he snorted some lines before he went here, if I had to guess, or some meth.
Very hard. I mean, hard to be this honest, but right? I mean, yeah, I would not ever go on to these things coked up or anything like that. I try to be straight, use the appearance as my motivation to be straight, do as best I could on it, and then afterwards enjoy a joint.
And afterwards, enjoy a joint, man. He makes stoners look so bad, man. Listen, this is one of the few cases to where such a stoner turns out to be such a fucking psycho, bro. Because I promise you, this is one of them rare cases. Meth, sure.
It's not the drug, though. It's not the weed's fault. It's not the drug's fault. It's the person's fault. That's always these things can be used for good and not so good. People use weed for good now. Some people use it for pain management. Some people use it for anxiety, and it keeps them off of pain pills. Okay. But the very same tool can be used and abused by someone else. You can't blame the tools. Blame the person.
Cocaine, sure. Alcohol, sure. But the weed couldn't even calm this psychopath down. You know what I'm saying? Listen, I guarantee you that he went to them places coked up. The fact that he says that, I tried to stay straight and I didn't even get coked up. Man, he likes to party. He smoked before the event, he smoked after, and he probably played with his nose in the bathroom. Allegedly. I don't know. I'm just talking shit. I don't know. But I just find it hilarious that behind the scenes, you're pushing out this, making my father proud, going on all these talk shows. Behind the scenes, you're just a druggie still. And it's a difference between being someone fighting with drugs and trying to do better and someone just being a druggie and not caring. He's the second option.
Did you ever do like dope after or anything like that?
That's why
you didn't shoot coke or dope this year.
No, and I haven't done that in about 3 or 4 years.
There's no moderating with that. Shooting coke.
There's no moderate. That's a whole life right there.
Was your dad? Did your dad know you were getting stoned?
Yeah.
Would he get pissed?
No,
he didn't give a fuck. He's a hippie. Your dad,
the reason
right?
he's a hippie. Yeah, and they're very understanding.
Well, they're happy you're doing well.
But see, me saying this, I feel first of all horrible about copping to the fact that But
you feel horrible in front of us.
And again, though, he could be lying here. Definitely a possibility. And they also say, as Eric Clapton said, she don't lie, she don't lie, she don't lie, cocaine. So he's being maybe open. And if he did that drug, it would not be a surprise to me at all. Even though he just said, I haven't done it for 3 to 4 years. I wouldn't believe that.
He feels horrible in front of the Dopey Nation.
Dopey Nation, I'm sorry. Also, in front of you.
This is not the choir group, and you don't have to feel upset about
But
it.
I feel a little hypocritical myself.
Yes.
Okay.
I think I'm more open-minded than you are.
Because I've made...
So they go on to discuss things. They go on to discuss rehab. There's some strange, weird trucks passing my apartment. Anyway, he goes on to discuss rehab, discuss the movie, how hard it is for him to stay sober in the appearances. And then they move on to basically his past, right? Now we're getting into rehab.
And so here's the other thing, though. He told us some clues about Rob there, too. He said, super understanding. And the other guy said, always like a hippie. So what do you want to bet that Nick absolutely exploited that understanding? Because that's what addicts will do. That's also what personality disordered people will do. They will exploit. And I should clarify, not every addict will do it, but many will. When push comes to shove, many will do anything to get one more, especially if that person also has a personality disorder. So it seems like Nick, he was exploiting that. So Rob was trying to be this understanding person, but instead it just got him manipulated.
That he's been in. Okay. Now, these guys are former drug addicts themselves, right? Self-proclaimed former drug addicts. That's why the podcast is called Dopey. I think it's a dope idea, to be honest. I think it's really cool. So they start to talk about that. And Nick, he's got some stories.
Now that we've gotten all the fucking
Okay, I'll get right into
philosophy
it.
out of the way.
All right, tell the Alina Lodge. I'll get my stupid philosophy out of the way. So I was in Alina Lodge, what you just described is a terrible place.
And the big thing is Mackenzie Phillips got sober there. That's like their big fame. Like,
I didn't
fame.
Oh yeah,
They played her speaker.
They name drop like it's TMZ.
Yeah.
And I got kicked out of there.
I feel like it's kind of ironic that he brings up TMZ because boy, you all over them.
Yep, I was thinking the same thing.
You all over their website right now. Shit, they name dropping all right. But anyways, let's hear about one of the first times he gets kicked out of rehab. Shocker.
And I spent 6 months there, and they dropped me off at the Salvation Army in Newark, New Jersey. And so,
why'd you get kicked out?
It's right by my neck of the wood, Jersey.
I did a bunch of that. I just wasn't having it. I was just like, this sucks. Like, I'd mouth off. Like, they make you sit in those lectures. And you
was Schottinger there? Mark Schottinger?
I chose to forget every name because
do people treat you bad because you're Rob Reiner's son?
They don't treat me badly, but I get treated in an uncomfortable way. Like I can't just be here. It's sort of like, let's hear about this thing. And it's like, I'm trying to get sober. I don't want to deal with this whole other thing right now.
Yeah.
But like, I got kicked out of there, and then I was living in New York City, and I met up with a girl that I met from there, who I'd never met before, but I'd seen her every day for 6 months.
Yeah.
Because you see them. Like,
you can't talk to the women. And it's funny because some guys.
And just note again the discrepancy of how different he sounds here versus in those other interviews where his dad is. And it's like, I tend to think there should be a substance in here too, because you don't get that much of a discrepancy usually without just your dad there. Yeah, you get a little bit. You'll see them open up a little bit more for sure. But this much, I don't know. I don't know about that. Not without a substance aiding.
Will be like with somebody, sort of, and they've never actually talked to them.
Yeah,
you're like making eyes
You're
at
like
each other.
flying notes to each other, and like there's a divide in the mess hall, and the staff members, like Gestapo members, would walk up and down the aisleways and to check if you were directed.
Dude, did you draw the pictures?
No.
Okay, so when we were there, you draw pictures on Saturday, and they'd hang them in the mess hall. So the guys and the girls used to try to communicate with each other because they would like. So I'd draw a picture and they'd hang it up in the mess hall, and all the girls would. So you could look at the girls' ones and they'd sign their name, and you could try to determine from their imagery if they were speaking to you.
Wow, that's interesting.
And this is where things start to get odd for me. Nick even said himself that he doesn't really like girls like that. Not that he's like gay or anything. I think he said something he said some psychopathic shit, basically. Like, he doesn't really like girls too much, but he likes their bodies. I don't want to misquote it, but he likes doing the stuff with them, but he doesn't really like girls. Some weird shit like this. And then
I mean, what does that mean? It just means he has a sex drive, but when it comes to actual women's company, not so much. He doesn't like that.
We're gonna move on. You know, he gets kicked out of rehab. He's talking about rehab. Now we move into like he's going to recount like an actual sexual experience with somebody. And listen, I ain't never had no experience like this before. So maybe I'm just, but I feel like he's like the signs were there, folks. The signs were there. Let's continue.
We weren't that smart. I was. Wait, what was
How did you ruin the girl?
Okay, so the girl.
Yeah, how did that happen?
I love this story because it's crazy, and I was 100% sober for it. Great. So I plan to meet this woman I've never met, who's 40 years old, and keep in mind
she was 40.
Yeah, I was like 18 at the time.
Were you having an eyeball romance in there?
No, that was the thing. It was just like maybe I'd go over, do some blow with her. I don't know what's gonna happen. Yeah. Whatever. Yeah. I show up literally like.
Mind you, he just gets out of rehab, and the first thing on his mind is maybe I could go hang out with her and do some blow with her.
Yeah, that's what I did when I was 20 years old. I left rehab. And I was in rehab for Oxycontin. And the day I left rehab was the first day I ever did heroin. So that's how addicts think.
Does this sound like listen, this guy is he is a drug connoisseur with a little bit of psychopath sprinkled in on it. That's what it is.
Out of a movie.
Wait, I'm sorry. Where are we right now? You show up where?
In Manhattan. Okay,
so you got kicked out.
I got from New Jersey to New York, and I was out here for about 6 months.
How'd you get in contact with her? Note from rehab?
Facebook or something. Okay. Like you got in contact with me.
Yeah.
I show up and there's a coke dealer outside of the apartment already, and they're doing. And I'm like, could this actually be happening right now? Yeah. And so the guy's like super sketched out. He leaves. We go back up into the apartment. She's railing lines of cocaine, and I didn't really want to get too intimate with her and make out with her. So one thing led to another. So we got in the shower, and can we talk about this guy?
Yeah.
Okay. No. We can talk about everything besides.
Dude, I tell a story. I tell a story where I was shooting meth, and a guy was begging to let him suck my dick while I was watching porn, saying no and jerking off.
Okay, perfect.
So you can say anything.
Well, that's
you can
awesome.
say anything.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm fingering her in the shower.
Listen, no comment to that story. You were doing what? And somebody was trying to do what? And you were watching what? And doing when? Around another man. Listen, no comment, Dopey crew. Let's get back to Nick Reiner's story.
Shower. So one thing led to another. So we got in the shower, and can we talk about this guy?
Yeah.
Okay.
No. We can talk about everything besides.
Dude, I tell a story. I tell a
Okay.
story where I was shooting meth, and a guy was begging to let him suck my dick while I was watching porn, saying no and jerking off.
Okay, perfect.
So you can say anything.
Well, that's
you can
awesome.
say anything.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm fingering her in the shower, and she's really sort of small, and I guess I pulled my finger out, and there was something on the tip of it, and it was a brown color, and it was shit, and I think I accidentally was fingering her ass, and she finished me off, and then I left.
Now hold on. It's so many questions. One, she was okay with it, so that's an interesting, that's an interesting situation in itself. Two,
and this is
how did she finish you off?
she she took her hand and she did me a service.
It was a manual.
It was a manual. Yeah.
She did the good old manual crank. You know what I'm saying? The good old. I guess she gets fingered and you get the good old fashioned handy. I mean, fair exchange, I guess. But that story is just so odd to me, gang. Let's keep it going, though.
That's a drug
And I
story.
said my goodbyes and I left. And this is where it gets sad.
Yeah.
I learned 3 months later that she had herself.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
Like it was because she never wanted to be fingered in her ass.
And my friend makes the joke that she killed herself because she's so ashamed of what happened with me.
Yeah, it was because you fingered her asshole.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a very callous way to talk about this. No care in the world. Laughing about it. That woman offed herself. Impaired to lack of empathy, I would say, right?
Like, why are you sticking your fingers in my ass? My life isn't worth living anymore.
Oh man, that's
And you know what? That's just hilarious. And that's just funny. You know, Nick Reiner just making jokes about the dead girl that he fingered. Oh, it's probably because she was so embarrassed. I don't know, bro. It's odd, bro. It's odd. But anyways, you would think that, maybe he has a few of those experiences. He sees this girl die and she died off of the drugs. She was probably railing some lines of cocaine that wasn't cocaine one day, and that was that. So you would think you would maybe straighten out. Nope. He goes to another rehab facility. But this time, okay, in this particular story, he's talking all out of order, but in this particular story, he tries heroin and he tries a little bit of crack. You know what I'm saying? Listen, no time ever in my life do I think I would ever be this ballsy to do this shit. He really just, I feel like this is what happens. People with no life experience think that doing crack and heroin and all this stuff is just a fun experience. They don't understand how it destroys.
Well, I've never done crack, but I've done all the rest of it myself because me personally, I didn't know I was autistic and I had this severe anxiety because they say autism affects your GABA system in your brain. GABA system is what regulates anxiety. That's why alcohol, a GABA A agonist, benzodiazepines, GABA A agonists, and there's other GABA B agonists like phenibut. But those things I really liked because I always had a baseline level of anxiety. They also say that people with autism have lowered levels of glutathione. And I take supplements now that actually improve that, which also makes sense to me. So to a normal person, they'll probably say what he's saying right now. But to someone like me, I think, well, of course, yeah, I can see all that. I can see the desire to do heroin, all of these things, because I did.
Entire communities. You know what I'm saying? People who come from poorer areas, they're never doing crack. They're never doing heroin. That's a forbidden sin. They call that shit dog food. We're not doing that. You know what I'm saying? But coming from a rich kid's perspective who's never gone through anything, never saw the homeless guy slowly dying at the side of the store every day when you go pick up your blunts or whatever, he doesn't have those experiences, so he thinks all these drugs are cool and just.
So I think we got the gist of this video though here too, right? So he has a lack of empathy. He doesn't care. He's probably on drugs in this interview here. And the rest of this is going to be drug stories, wild stories, just ridiculousness, which also shows that what? The character issues, personality disorder issues, and addiction issues. Which one it is? Probably a combination of them all. That's what I would say. Always a combination. Now let's go back to Dr. Grande. See what Dr. Grande has to say for himself.
About the story that Nick Reiner, Rob Reiner's son, has schizophrenia and how that could impact this case, the murder case going forward. Like, did schizophrenia cause Nick Reiner to allegedly commit the murders? And how would a diagnosis of schizophrenia affect the insanity defense? So again, I'll be a little bit more informal here. I'm going to offer a brief background, including the timeline of the crime, then move to my analysis. Rob Reiner is a famous director, His career started with acting. He was in All in the Family, and then he moved on to direct several well-known movies like The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, and A Few Good Men. He had 3 children with his wife, Michelle. Rob was also married before to Penny Marshall, and he adopted her daughter. But with Michelle, he had 3 children. One of those children was Nick Reiner. He was born in 1993. Nick had a troubled history as far as his mental health and substance use. He went to rehab 18 times. Eventually, he became sober and worked on a movie with his father that was based on their experiences, like Nick's drug use and how Rob reacted. Nick wasn't happy because Rob pushed him into therapy several times, and that's kind of what the movie was about. By 2025, Nick lived with Rob and Michelle in a mansion in the Brentwood neighborhood of Los Angeles. Nick was in a guest house. Previously, Nick stated that he had broken objects in that guest house. So his behavior was erratic, disruptive, and maybe even violent leading up to 2025. On December 13, 2025, Nick went to Conan O'Brien's Christmas party. He wasn't invited, but his parents asked if they could take him because they were worried about his behavior. They wanted to keep an eye on what Nick was doing. At the party, Nick made a scene. He approached a number of people and asked them if they were famous. A lot of people at the party would have been famous, I would imagine. At one point, he approached the comedian Bill Hader. Bill was talking to somebody else.
And he's the dude from the meme, the back and forth meme that you see all the time.
And Nick interrupted. Bill told him it was a private conversation. Nick wasn't very happy about this. He stared at Bill Hader before storming off. At this point, Rob Reiner gets into an argument with Nick, telling...
And the interesting part about this video with Dr. Grande is he goes over 3 different reasons why someone with schizophrenia might be violent. And I think that part's interesting. And then we can see if that actually fits to what Nick is all about.
Him that his behavior was inappropriate for a visitor in someone else's home. Now, at this point, Rob and Michelle go back to their mansion, and Nick apparently made his way there as well. Maybe not too long after that. He was captured on video at 11:16 p.m., walking away from the house. He was about a half mile away. So the next day, on December 14, Rob and Michelle were found murdered by their daughter who lived across the street. A massage therapist showed up at the mansion for an appointment. There was no answer, so the daughter investigated. This is when she found her father stabbed. When first responders arrived, they found that her mother had been stabbed. Both Rob and Michelle, again, had been killed. So the obvious suspect was Nick Reiner, and if we look at this, we can kind of piece it together. He must have killed his parents before 11:16 p.m., probably before 11 p.m., because, again, he was a half mile away from his parents' house when he was captured on video, and he was walking. It wasn't like he was driving. So
one thing you're going to get with Dr. Grande is you will get some pretty level-headed takes. He can have his biases like anyone can, but for the most part, he's pretty reasonable and down the center, I would say.
Presumably, allegedly, he went home after the Christmas party. He was angry with his father and maybe his mother too. He murdered them. He realized that he was in a lot of trouble. He couldn't escape. So he left the house and he ended up in a hotel. And later he was arrested in Exposition Park, the neighborhood of Los Angeles. Nick was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. And that's where the case stands right now. So he has retained a high-power criminal defense attorney named Alan Jackson, who reportedly charges around $2,000 an hour. Very expensive. And I can only imagine that Rob Reiner's estate is footing the bill. I don't know where else Nick would get that kind of money. And a murder trial is extremely expensive anyway. So this is going to be a very expensive magical journey through the criminal justice system for Nick. Now, after I made my last video on the Rob Reiner case not that long ago, the media reported that Nick Reiner had schizophrenia. This was
And by the way, if you're here, remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not already. I also talk about narcissism and toxic behaviors, and I interview a lot of licensed professionals, other authors, and other people in the narcissistic abuse space. Also talk about current events sometimes too, radical self-respect, addiction, and mental health.
was new information as far as what was being reported. Before that, people were just really looking at the substance use angle, which is what I examined in the 2 videos that I did before this. So up to that point, Nick used substances. The theory was that maybe this contributed in some way to him allegedly killing his parents. Now, there were, I think, interpersonal factors at play. The substances didn't make him commit the murders, but the substances could have contributed in some manner. Now, with schizophrenia, that really changes things. That's different than substance use. The two, of course, can be comorbid, and they often are, but that is a different disorder. Schizophrenia is different than substance use disorder. It has different symptom criteria, a different course, and a different association with violence. So in light of this schizophrenia diagnosis, now the narrative in the media has shifted from substances and their potential contribution to this idea that Nick's alleged homicidal behavior could be blamed on schizophrenia. There's been a discussion about a medication change, and that's really what's being looked at now. So presumably, Nick was on an antipsychotic medication. Those medications are common for people with schizophrenia. It's a common treatment effort. And his medication changed. So he was taken off of one drug.
So Dr. Grande is going off the cuff here, I think, more than he usually does. So I think that's why his cadence is a little off.
Put on another. This is a prescription medication, a psychotropic. And he had a bad reaction. The media reported that he was erratic. And the idea here is that maybe this medication change in the effort to treat schizophrenia caused him or contributed in some way to him allegedly committing the murders. So I'll talk about this for a little bit before examining the rest of the schizophrenia angle here. When looking at people who take antipsychotic medication, what we usually see when a person goes on the drug is that they become lethargic or agitated. Now, this is whether they have been taking no drugs and they just go to the prescription medication, or whether they move from one antipsychotic to another. So the reaction here again is being lethargic or becoming agitated, somewhere on that continuum. They might feel sleepy, sedated, or they might have psychomotor agitation where they feel like they can't stop moving. Now, that can certainly be distressing. Anything on that continuum can be a problem. And there can be other symptoms as well, of course. But anything on that continuum can be problematic, but not as it relates to violence. These symptoms, the symptoms of changing medication, would actually make somebody less efficient at being a killer, not more efficient.
I would agree with that. Usually you're into withdrawal, probably not going to be murdering someone, is what I would say.
Like, again, if somebody's sedated, they're probably not going to be interested in going through all the work of committing homicide, especially not a stabbing homicide. And then if somebody has psychomotor agitation, they're going to be upset. They're going to feel like they don't quite have control over their body, probably not confident enough to run into a bedroom and stab people. So is it possible that the medication change pushed Nick over the edge and directly facilitated the murders? Sure, anything's possible, but I think it's unlikely. I would expect that time of changing medication to be a time of suffering, yes, but not an increased risk of violence. Confusion, slowed thinking.
And again, what happens in one person's case cannot explain all cases. So someone will say, oh, this happened to me in one person's case. One person switched med and killed someone. It's like, that's one case. How many other cases are there out there where nothing like that happens? Probably many times more. So nothing's impossible, but it's about more like probabilities and odds. And you also need to look into the variables of what that person is dealing with. Is there also addiction involved? Is there also personality disorders involved? Like, what is it? Each situation needs to be taken individually.
Disorientation and impaired executive functioning are not helpful for someone who is looking to be violent, and they certainly don't cause violence. Now, moving away from the medication change theory, let's take a look at the possible contribution of schizophrenia to the homicides through other mechanisms. How does this information about Nick having schizophrenia alter the theories about what happened? Schizophrenia is a chronic mental disorder characterized by...
And again, I guess he's going off of the basis here that it is true that he's schizophrenic. I'm a little hesitant to believe that because I want to know where it came from. Did the doctor say that? Is the lawyer feeding that information? We don't know for sure, so it's all just speculation.
By hallucinations, delusions, disorganized speech and behavior, reduced emotional expression and motivation, and impaired executive functioning. It is a serious disorder, and it has long-term consequences for most people who develop it. Schizophrenia has a great effect on a person's quality of life. Just like every disorder, a person can have mild, moderate, or severe symptoms. Mild schizophrenia has an impact on a person, but they might be able to function pretty well still. Moderate becomes a little more difficult. Severe, it's very difficult. Schizophrenia is often thought of in terms of the positive symptoms, like psychosis, hallucinations, and delusions are part of psychosis, and negative symptoms, like a flat affect. So it's not just being psychotic. There's another piece to it, and that's an important component of the disorder and how it presents. Schizophrenia is associated with an increased risk of violence, but not a dramatic risk by itself. So if a person only has schizophrenia, I would not necessarily expect to see a much greater tendency to be violent. The disorder becomes more dangerous when it's combined with other factors. For example, if a person with schizophrenia is using substances.
Correct. It's going to make it worse.
As Nick Reiner did, we see a dramatic increase in the risk. There are definitely concerns when seeing comorbid schizophrenia and substance use. Another concerning factor is the presence of delusions which feature dangerous content, like if a person is hearing voices ordering them to kill. Many delusions aren't really necessarily harmful as far as a risk of violence. For example, I've seen people who believed that they could go to a casino. They had this belief that they could go to a casino and they could place one bet for any amount of money, like $1 or $2, and they would walk away with millions.
And this reminds me of the Son of Sam case, the 44 caliber killer, the Son of Sam. One of his defenses was there was a demon dog that was telling him to kill these people. He later admitted it was a hoax, but that was one of the defenses that he was trying to use. I think David Berkowitz was his name.
Right? No repeated betting, just one bet, and that's it. And they could do that as many times as they wanted. So they could leave that casino with billions or trillions of dollars. Is it possible something like that could happen? Well, I guess anything's possible, but it's really unlikely to the point where that's a fixed false belief. It's a delusion. Now, this delusion might hurt them financially, but it's not connected with violence, usually. So that's an example of a delusion where maybe no one's going to get hurt. Other delusions can be dangerous. As I mentioned, if someone has command hallucinations, if they're hearing voices, for instance, telling them that they need to kill someone, they might listen to that voice. That could result in danger. So not all delusions are dangerous, but some are. Some have dangerous content. Now, applying this back to Nick's situation, as far as the substance use risk factor, Nick had a history of substance use. This was well known. He reported using heroin and cocaine. If he did have schizophrenia and substance use, that could explain the homicidal behavior. That could be a contributing factor. That doesn't mean he was legally insane, just a contributing factor.
And notice none of these other doctors here, how many of them are talking about the possible personality disorders? The other Andrew doctor, he came closest to talking about it, but H.G. Tudor talked about it more. right? And I think H.G. Tudor is actually closer to the mark here. The other ones are not talking about it as much, but I think they're missing it. Now, the other woman, the FBI profiler, she was too. So I give her credit for that too. I think her name was Pat Brown.
What about the possible contribution of delusions? Could Nick's delusions have pushed him to kill? Well, other than the media reporting he has schizophrenia, there is no more information about Nick being delusional. I don't know if he had delusions or not. For argument's sake, let's say that he did. Schizophrenia has a strong association with delusions. The types of delusions observed with schizophrenia that are dangerous often come from one of three categories: imminent threat, moral justification, and misidentification. Imminent threat is where the delusion leads the person to believe that other people are out to get them. So, for instance, a man might be walking through a grocery store and he looks at the other customers and he thinks they're really aliens who are getting ready to attack him.
And that's not what was happening here. I don't think it's any of these three that he's about to mention for Nick.
Like it's a conspiracy, they're out to get him, they followed him to the store, so he might attack them to protect himself. The moral justification delusion is about a delusion that makes a person believe that they have to cause harm in order to uphold some type of moral standard. Religion is often involved with these. So the man might target, using a man as an example, the man might target people because he believes they are bad or evil. He might go after the head of a company because he believes that company is creating something like toxic waste or something that's dangerous. He is trying to save others. He is trying to stop future harm. And he's going to do that by enforcing some type of moral code. Again, many of these delusions, many of the moral justification delusions are based on religious beliefs. So the man might consider himself to be like a religious warrior who can take out the bad guys and cause the coming of a deity, right? So the deity.
And I have seen versions of that schizophrenia too. Like I said, my friend, he thought he was battling the devil. And he wrote a book about it. And I read the book as if it was true, because I do believe he truly believes it. He doesn't believe he's schizophrenic. He believes he was truly battling the devil. And some people say that the schizophrenic people have one foot in the spiritual world and one foot in the real world. But I'll let you all decide for yourself.
He might believe that there's a deity that's going to come to earth and save people or something like that. That's common with many religions. And he can bring about that trip. He can cause the deity to come to earth by wiping out the evildoers. Misidentification is a type of delusion where a person believes that someone they know pretty well, like a parent, has been replaced by a clone, an imposter. This clone is identical in every way. Now, there's many versions of misidentification. Some are a little different, like instead of a clone, it's a robot or an alien or something like that. But they all involve the individual having this delusion where there's an imposter. So it's pretty scary to them because now they could feel under threat. So there's overlap with imminent threat with this misidentification delusion. Now, going back to the situation with Nick, even if he has delusions, there's no evidence that he has one of the types associated with violence. Like imminent threat, for instance, there are no reports of Nick believing that he was in danger. That's never mentioned anywhere. Moral justice.
Correct. I don't think it's any of these three, which leads you to believe what? Personality disorder, character issue.
Justification, no report of that, and misidentification. He definitely knew who his parents were. That was part of the problem. He allegedly targeted them specifically. Another facet of schizophrenia that's really important to understand when it comes to calculating the risk of violence is a condition called anosognosia. This is a profound lack of insight. Now, sometimes when people hear about this lack of insight, they think, okay, this is just denial. With substance use, this is pretty common. A man's drinking a lot of alcohol. His friends approach him and say, look, you have a problem. You're drinking every day. You're stumbling around. You're not getting your work done. You're losing all your money. You're losing relationships. We're about to abandon you too if you don't clean up your act. And the guy's like, I don't have a problem. I'm a casual drinker. I can stop anytime. That's really the classic line that I've heard many times. I can stop anytime. That's denial. In that example, the man has the capacity to recognize the problem, but they choose not to accept it. Information is absorbed. The man is understanding. He's appreciating what's being said, but then he's pushing it away. Furthermore, denial tends to fluctuate. So the man might agree from time to time that he could have a problem. Anosognosia is much different. With that condition, the man lacks the capacity to recognize the illness. Again, a profound lack of insight. One could think of denial versus anosognosia like through refusal versus unable, right? I'm refusing to accept the truth versus I'm literally unable to. It becomes apparent right away with anosognosia that it's really problematic for treatment. Many mental disorders feature a degree of anosognosia. So anxiety disorders, we see a low risk. Major depressive disorder without psychosis, low risk. OCD is variable. Some people have great insight. Some people have no insight. With substance use, anosognosia tends to be high. Personality disorders, it tends to be high. Bipolar disorder, especially during a manic episode, very high. And schizophrenia, very high.
And he's the only person I've heard talk about this aspect, so.
About 65% of individuals with schizophrenia have anosognosia. They do not recognize hallucinations or delusions as pathological. The delusion they have is experienced as a fact, not a belief. Anosognosia with schizophrenia leads to an increased risk of violence. But did Nick have anosognosia? So if you look through his different interviews, different statements he made, it seemed pretty clear that he recognized he was ill. There was no mention of schizophrenia, but he recognized he had substance use disorder. He believed he had a problem. He was not happy with his father's method for handling that problem, but he believed that his problem was real. Nick believed he had a mental disorder. When you look at the incident at the Christmas party, Nick had the insight to be insulted. So
here's what it means. I looked up at the old ChatGPT. Definition. It's anosognosia. anosognosia is a neurological condition in which a person is unaware of their own illness, impairment, or deficit. It's not denial or stubbornness. It's a brain-based lack of insight. Key points. Neurological, not psychological. The person genuinely cannot perceive the problem. Arguing, explaining, or presenting evidence usually doesn't change their belief. Commonly seen in stroke, traumatic brain injury, Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder. Did not mention personality disorders. Examples. A person paralyzed on one side insists they can move normally. Someone with dementia says, my memory is fine despite clear impairment. A person with schizophrenia denies being ill and refuses treatment. Why it matters. It's a major reason people refuse treatment. It complicates caregiving and legal decisions. It's often mistaken for gaslighting, arrogance, or denial, but it's neither. So if you're Alan Jackson, you want to get a hold of this term and probably use it to your advantage.
Bill Hader told him that there was a private conversation, kind of like saying, get lost, and Nick was insulted. With anosognosia, that profound lack of insight, I would expect somebody in Nick's situation to simply keep talking, to mention delusional content or something like that, not to be insulted, not to take that personally. Anosognosia creates this barrier where people can be very durable in interpersonal interactions. They're not going to get insulted. They're going to be tough. They're not sensitive. Now, statistically, as I mentioned, 65% of people with schizophrenia have anosognosia. So from that frame, from that way of thinking, it's more likely than not that Nick did have it, but there's no real evidence of it. So I'm just not sure. So when trying to figure out,
I would say it's a charitable interpretation to say he has that. I don't think he does. All I'm saying is I'm sure the defense team will try to make it seem like he does if they know it. They got to see how it plays out, though, with the toxicology report, etc.
if schizophrenia led to violence in any particular instance, it is important to look at the nature of the attack. When a person with schizophrenia engages in violence, the act of violence tends to fall in a few different categories: impulsive, defensive, or in response to a threat. I would not expect to see a provocation lead to violence if a lot of time passed between the provocation and the violent act. Even a half hour would be surprising. Usually, the violence is going to occur right after the provocation, right in that moment. In Nick's case, there was a cooling down period, right? Like Conan O'Brien's home is not the same as Rob's home. Nick had to travel from wherever Conan O'Brien lives to where Rob lived. So he had this chance to cool down and process things and think about what he was going to do. If he did commit the murders, he had time to think about it after being provoked.
And what does that show? Intention, and awareness. Score +1 for the prosecution.
After experiencing what he considered to be provocation. Another way that Nick's alleged violent act doesn't fit in with schizophrenia is how it involved external stimuli. This was an interaction with his father that led to it, not internal stimuli. That's unusual. I wouldn't expect to see anger or revenge as a motive. I wouldn't expect to see a stressor based on an interpersonal interaction be the motive. I would expect to see it coming from inside, from the psychosis. So when kind of backing away and looking at all of this, Nick's behavior doesn't really line up with the type of violence one might expect to see with schizophrenia. His pattern doesn't
I agree. Not schizophrenia violence.
match. There is no reason to think he was acting defensively. He was on the offense when he allegedly murdered his parents. There was a delay between the argument and the murders, and Nick tried to escape afterward. So there's a consciousness of guilt. He knew he did something wrong. When he interacted with people afterward, like renting the hotel room, he was able to communicate logically. He understood what people were saying, and he was able to relay information to them in an organized way. So that kind of makes me think there was no active psychosis. It's important to remember that even if Nick was psychotic during the murders,
What the hell happened to Rob Reiner's shirt here?
he may still have understood the difference between right and wrong. Even with command hallucinations, even when a person is being told to do something, they might know that what they're hearing is wrong, that if they act on it, they would be engaging in wrongful conduct. So the mere presence of hallucinations is not enough to be found legally insane. The person could understand what they're doing is wrong, and that way they would not be legally insane. They would be held accountable. So with all this in mind, when looking at all the information currently available in this case, did schizophrenia cause the murders? Well, it may have contributed, but it was probably not the cause. What are the chances that Nick Reiner will be successful if he uses an insanity defense? I would say very low. In addition to the violent act not matching up with schizophrenia, there was the comorbidity with the substances. So that's going to be a problem. Nick can't use substances and then say they caused him to be insane. It doesn't work that way. He has to take responsibility for what happens if he uses substances. Could there be some mitigation based on schizophrenia? That's possible, but I don't see the state of California doing that.
But again, remember, he's got the best defense that money can buy. And when in cases where it shouldn't work out for him, he's got the best chance that it might because of money. Better defense, more money equals better defense.
Sense, all this is a little academic because if he is found not guilty by reason of insanity, he's still going to be locked up. It's just going to be in a different place, not a prison, but a mental health facility. Often those are substantially worse than prisons. So again, it's kind of academic, but it's interesting to look at. It's interesting to see how his alleged behavior lines up with what we know about schizophrenia and the tendencies that exist there. If we look at the successful cases for the insanity defense involving schizophrenia specifically, we see that there was no doubt the perpetrator was psychotic at the time of the homicide, no doubt he was suffering from a dangerous delusion, and no effort to escape consequences. Nick's situation doesn't align with those factors. He may try to use mental illness as an excuse because he has no other choice. It looks like he's in.
If it makes you mad that more money equals better defense, it should make you mad, because if you're not angry, you're not paying attention. And how do you know? Look at the prosecution rates of the people that maybe have a public defender versus the ones that have a high-priced lawyer. And look at what you'll see. You'll see a lot of things.
Quite a bit of trouble. I don't know what the evidence is outside of what little has been released, but he has been arrested and charged. And there was this report that blood was found in that hotel I talked about, in his hotel room. So it's not looking too good for Nick. This is a sad case that serves as a reminder that it's important to take precautions when dealing with people who have a history of violence, regardless of the mental health components. Whether they have a mental disorder or not, past violence is a pretty good predictor of future violence. Nick had a history of being erratic. He caused his parents to be concerned about what he was doing, to the point where they even took him to the party. It makes sense that there should have been substantial precautions taken. But hindsight's always 20/20, so I don't think at the time Rob and Michelle were unreasonable as far as the precautions. They did the best they could. I really believe they were trying to help Nick. They might not have understood the mental disorders very well, but they were doing.
I don't think they did the best they could. I think you can say that if they're naive, but I think they could have done better. I don't think they had good enough boundaries. I think they were enabling him too much. I think they gave him too much of the benefit of the doubt. They believed him when they shouldn't. And I think it cost them. I don't think they did. I think quote unquote tough love would have been better in this case. And people hate that term now, but in this case, I think clear boundaries were needed. Boundaries and consequences.
They could do. And they kept Nick close. Like, he lived in their guest house. So they were trying to stay on top of things. It's admirable. It, of course, did not work out well in this situation, but in many situations it would have. So sometimes there's just these random components that come together in a way that no one could expect. When I talk about schizophrenia and I talk about risk factors like comorbidity and dangerous delusions, it's important to remember that most of the time, a person with schizophrenia is not going to kill anybody. That's rare. There may be an increased risk of violence, but that's a lot different than homicide. Not all violence is homicidal violence. So this story, I think, has the potential to cause people to be really worried about schizophrenia. They might look at this and say, oh, if somebody has schizophrenia, they're definitely going to kill. Not at all. That's not at all correct. It's just panic that's caused by this high-profile case. So that's what happens with cases like this often, is they look like they're going to advance the knowledge about a disorder like schizophrenia or substance use, but they actually cause fear. People look at Nick and then they look at people in their own lives and say, wow, these people are similar. Maybe I should worry about them. But usually that concern is unfounded. The focus with schizophrenia should be mental health treatment.
And Dr. Grande, he got his start talking about narcissism, psychopathy, borderline. He just doesn't talk about it very much anymore. That's why I know who he is, because back when I was first learning about the stuff years ago, he was one of the people there to learn from. And he was good. He has some good videos about it. One of my favorite quotes of Dr. Grande was, narcissists lie because the truth is offensive to them. And I said, oh, yes, that makes perfect sense.
And support, not necessarily fear. In certain situations, it makes sense to take precautions, but that doesn't mean a person needs to live in constant fear. So those are my thoughts on the Rob Reiner murder in light of Nick having schizophrenia. There's a lot to it. Schizophrenia has been well researched. We know a lot about it. And it certainly put a curious spin on this case that Nick has this diagnosis. Again, that's what the media reports. I'll run under the assumption that it's true. If Nick invokes an insanity defense, it's going to be a pretty interesting trial where all these issues and factors related to schizophrenia are going to be brought up. The disorder is going to be dismantled completely and then reassembled by both the prosecution and the defense, with each side looking for an angle to prove their point. The prosecution is going to say probably a lot of what I said in this video, which is the pattern of violence exhibited by Nick doesn't match what is seen with some people with schizophrenia. The defense is going to say, no, he was actively psychotic. I mean, they might say this. He was actively psychotic. He misidentified his parents. He had dangerous delusions and all this. So each side is going to do their best to prove their point. But in the end, I'm pretty sure things are not going to work out so well for Nick Reiner. That's my...
Yep, that's the end of that. Well, that could be pretty much it maybe for the night, unless there's anything else you all want to see me go over. Heard that too. I heard she didn't pay. Yes. Who I love. That's because they were acting entitled and destructive at gigs. Well, that's a fine line, you know. If it's in the contract to pay, it's in the contract to pay. Where's the line to not pay someone? I don't know. It can be a gray area. But I know there's certain people in the industry that just really don't like her. So, and here's the thing. Back when Ozzy died in the summertime, I made a tribute post to Ozzy, and people were ripping me on Instagram. Oh, you don't understand narcissism if you don't know freaking Sharon Osbourne's a narcissist. I was like, dude, I don't know anything about Sharon Osbourne. This post is about Ozzy Osbourne, not Sharon Osbourne. If I dig into her, maybe I would learn things I didn't like. But, and so they told me some of those things. I was okay. Maybe not the best, but I don't know. I don't know her. I don't know her. Yeah, and she did save Ozzy. Most people probably would have left, but when you're married to Ozzy, you stay there. Can you talk about him being a psychopath? Probably. Well, we already did. We already did talk about that, of course. We mentioned how when he said things like, I'm going to kill that fucking dog. And then when he was an intern at Family Guy, there's a woman who said he had a dark and twisted energy. That's not what you say about someone who's schizophrenic, usually. You say that about someone with a personality disorder. You say that with someone that has character issues. And then addictions, they exasperate all of that, in my opinion. So that's what we know. We're going to have to wait for the toxicology report. We're going to have to see if he truly was diagnosed with schizophrenia. I have my doubts that he was. It might be something that's being floated out there, possibly by the lawyer, Alan Jackson, because that's what he did in the Karen Reed case. But that's what we know so far. More will need to be revealed. Maybe we're not going to know until that arraignment date. I think it's January 7th. But we'll see. Ozzy replied to me once on YouTube. Did he really, Cap? Told him to do a song with Buckethead. He said, I'll see what Sharon can do. Ozzy did love Sharon. I'll give him that, you know. And as a rock star, with all the women throwing themselves at him, yeah, I'm sure he cheated back in the day, but later on in his life, I don't think he did. I'm willing to debate anyone who thinks Sharon's NPD. Like I said, I don't know. But there is this blonde woman who was ripping me a new one on Instagram saying, Jared, you don't understand narcissism if you don't see that with her. I'm like, what are you talking about? If anything, the blonde woman who was ripping me, I was like, you are the one that seems narcissistic to me, not Sharon. It's like, get a grip. Get a grip. Gross. Oh, Cat's not going to like that. Was he? It's the first I heard about Ozzy. And Sharon was too? I wouldn't have thought that. It's hard to know with Ozzy. I mean, because Ozzy's a case of like, did he drug himself into something? That's possible. It's possible. I don't know what you would say that diagnosis was. Did he have Parkinson's? Is that what he had at the end? I don't know. George. You needed some blue chews. Is that what you're saying? Thank you, Always Sunny. Happy holidays to you too. We recorded this on Christmas Day, Phil Bradley. We will find out lots of things in the trial. And by the way, we've been able to get away with it so far, but pretty soon might have to nominate a moderator or two to keep the chat in order. But for the most part, it's been friendly. For the most part. As of now, I can moderate it. But we'll see. Yeah, if he was using or drunk, I can see Ozzy giving a disappointing performance for sure. Always Sunny. So if you comment, Always Sunny, I can try to do that. I don't know if I can do that from here. Yeah, maybe not. So once the video is posted, you make a comment, I can do it from there, I think. Yeah, that'd be good. All right, everybody. That's really all I had for today. We're at the 3-hour mark here. Good chunk of time for people to watch things. There'll be another video tomorrow. We'll see what unfolds between now and then. Maybe there'll be another case to break down here too. And I'm still going to be looking for more people to interview. If any of you have people that you want me to see me interview, doctors about narcissism, autism, addiction, I'm going to reach out to that guy, Dr. Joseph, from the other day. He's very interesting to me because he is not a fan of psychiatric medication. And the rest of Big Pharma doesn't like him, of course, but I think that's exactly what would make him a very interesting interview because I'm not a big fan of Big Pharma either. I take all natural supplements and I think it helps. So Sam Vaknin might not like me, but I can see. I don't think Sam Vaknin likes me and Peter Salerno, Dr. Peter Salerno. Time flies when you're having fun, right? But HG Tudor, maybe I can see if HG Tudor is willing to do one of these lives with me. Join me in the live. Yeah, we did. We went over Dr. Drew. I think it was last night. And I did not go over Dr. Drew, though, on What's-His-Face's podcast, Adam Carolla. I did not do that. Went over Dr. Drew and this other guy. But he's good. I mean, I agreed with most of what Dr. Drew had to say. I did not agree that he said, oh, he must be feeling all sorts of guilt and shame. And I said, that really depends. Some people can feel guilt and shame after they do something bad, but not people with psychopathy or NPD. They're going to be guiltless, shameless. So that's where I differed with him, where it would all depend. Depends on the person. Depends on exactly what they have going on. If you don't know what they have going on, it's going to be hard to say. Dr. Drew said a lot of his behavior added up with, what's it called? It added up with meth use. And I can see that too. What's the genuine question? I can't put links in the comments, so I can post them in the description of the video. But it's just Radical Self-Respect, Avoid Falling for the Same BS on Amazon. And there's an ebook and an audiobook narrated by yours truly. You know, I do have Jordan Peterson's email, and I did speak to him once years ago. Spoke to him years ago. And I know his wife, Tammy, and I would love to talk to him again. Well, I did. It was just too long. The whole Amazon link is too long. You never know, Danielle. You never know. I've seen things like that happen. Yeah, I did hear Dr. or Sam Vaknin say that about Jordan Peterson. I mean, Jordan Peterson certainly seems sensitive to criticism. I'll say that. And he does seem to have some grandiose elements there. Absolutely. Let's see. All right, everybody. That's really all I had for the day. I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. I might even be here on Christmas Day too. We'll have to see. Interview Dr. Grande and FF his answers. What does FF mean? Have a good one, Jolly. D4VD case? I have not, but I can check it out. That could be something interesting. Well, the book is in every comment section of the videos. It's more difficult sometimes with the live streams. But look. There it is. Have a great night, Black Sheep. I'll post it in the comments to see if it turns into a link. I don't think it's going to. It's too long. If you can copy and paste all of that, that's what it is. So that's to see as a pain in the ass. It's ridiculous. I do love Soundgarden and Chris Cornell too. Absolutely. You know, you got to create a whole account to shorten the link. So I'll figure it out. And I might interview Richard Grande. Richard Grande was just on Mark Vicente's show. I was also a guest on Mark Vicente's show, if you know him. He was part of the Nexium cult. I might have him on the show here too. But all right, everybody. Over and out.